Chapter 161. Post-Battle Eye. 2 days after the resurrection of Joseph Crackstone, Nevermore was bustling with activity. Too much, considering classes hadn't officially started yet. This was due to the lunar eclipse that occurred 2 days ago. No one in the outcast society had imagined that during 2 consecutive eclipses, such significant events would take place, leaving everyone astounded. In both events, 2 names stood out among the outcasts: Luke Poe and Wednesday Addams. Both were the protagonists of both blood moons. During this blood moon, Crackstone was resurrected only to be killed again, followed by a confrontation with Dolores Spellman, the wife of the Spellman family patriarch. She was defeated in combat and ultimately killed by Luke, Wednesday, and Fester Addams, a surprising addition that no one had expected. After this, many outcasts working for the council were sent to Nevermore to thoroughly investigate what had happened there. Even members of the Demon Extermination Department were involved, as Crackstone had been a demonic normie in his time. The belief of the non-council outcasts was that Crackstone gained his strength from a book of witchcraft, and that he led hundreds of armed normies. They still saw him as the nemesis of America's outcasts, but they did not know that the real source of his power was a demonic book. The outcasts who fought Crackstone realized his strength far surpassed what could be explained by an ordinary witchcraft book, but they couldn't share this discovery with others, as they were killed by him. The only survivor was Goody Addams, who dedicated her entire life to vengeance and, for that reason, didn't actively reveal that Crackstone actually possessed a demonic book rather than a witchcraft book. Then, when Crackstone was imprisoned in the blood sarcophagus, years passed, and many outcasts forgot the name Joseph Crackstone, until it resurfaced during the lunar eclipse when Atlas and the others sought to free him so the normie could wreak havoc and kill Luke Poe. However, not everyone forgot that Crackstone had been a xenophobe and a genocidal figure with powers derived from stolen psychic books, or so they believed regarding the origin of his abilities. For this reason, many outcast families harbor hatred toward normies and strongly oppose sending their children to Nevermore, an institution seeking reconciliation but located in a place where such a genocidal figure lived, and where Crackstone is portrayed as a hero and a good man, has not won their favor. The news about the event on Raven Island during this blood moon wasn't hidden from the general outcast public. It was too significant to cover up completely, similar to the first blood moon when Nevermore was attacked by an army of zombies. During this second blood moon, Raven Island was largely destroyed. Moreover, a prominent figure in outcast society, Dolores Spellman, was killed. No one could believe that 3 key figures from the main Spellman family line had died in such a short time. Essentially, Luke had wiped out half of the Spellman family's main branch. Now only Elliot and his mother, Sabrina, and Sebastian's grandmother remained. As for Elliot's father, he had been killed years ago by John and Sophie Poe, Luke's parents. Regarding Elliot's grandparents, they were legally deceased due to their age. However, Luke suspected they might have made demonic deals and were in hiding. If he was lucky, perhaps one had died naturally, which would make things easier for him. Meanwhile, Wednesday was in one of Nevermore's infirmaries, sitting upright in a chair. Her dark eyes slowly moved from side to side as she read the lines of a small book she held in her pale hands. Every so often, Wednesday would stop reading and glance to the side. There was a bed where a teenage boy lay, wrapped in bandages. It was Luke. His breathing had stabilized, but he had yet to regain consciousness since losing it 2 days ago. Wednesday tried to focus on her book, but she couldn't help looking at Luke's sleeping face every so often, hoping he would open his eyes. Hope. Wednesday thought she had never believed herself capable of such a feeling within her being. At that moment, the infirmary door opened, and footsteps approached the bed where Luke rested. Wednesday rose from her chair and stood in front of Luke's bed, staring at the person entering. When she saw who it was, she frowned. It was a pretty girl, slightly taller than Wednesday, with long, straight black hair, bronze skin, and amber eyes. It was Veronica Umbrio. "You again?" Wednesday asked in a cold tone, making it clear that Veronica was not welcome. "As pleasant as always, Addams. What are you, his personal bodyguards?" Veronica replied in an equally cold tone, her expression unfriendly as she saw Wednesday standing protectively in front of Luke, as if expecting an attack. "I'm his girlfriend," Wednesday retorted in a curt and monotone voice. Veronica clicked her tongue softly and grabbed a chair. Without another word, she moved it to the foot of Luke's bed, keeping a deliberate distance from Wednesday. She sat down and gazed at Luke with concern. In her hands, she held a container of homemade food she had prepared herself. Wednesday followed her movements the entire time. When she realized Veronica wasn't a threat, she returned to her own chair. The room fell into silence. The only sound was Luke's steady breathing, his chest rising and falling at a calm, moderate pace. "Why won't she stop staring at me?" thought Veronica, furrowing her brows. It was uncomfortable having Wednesday's vacant gaze on her all the time. "Any updates?" Veronica asked, breaking the silence. "Do you think if there were any updates, Luke would still be in the same position he's been in for the past 2 days?" Wednesday replied in her usual monotone voice, laced with her signature way of making others feel stupid. "This girl," Veronica thought, taking a deep breath. She hadn't come here to argue with this goth girl. She knew it would lead nowhere, and the only one who'd end up angry would be herself. When Veronica remained silent, Wednesday pressed on, clearly wanting to be alone with Luke. "Why are you here?" she asked, her tone anything but friendly. "Why wouldn't I be? I'm Luke's family. If I want to see him, you're not going to stop me," Veronica said, meeting Wednesday's gaze with a defiant look. "Family," Wednesday repeated with a disdainful smirk. "Yes, family. What's the problem?" Veronica asked. "I find it amusing that the Umbrio family considers themselves part of Luke's family. You share blood, but nothing else. You never helped him or his mother. You read his mother's letter about the demons, and yet you didn't lift a finger," Wednesday said, her gaze piercing and accusatory. Veronica's face darkened. The rude girl was right. "Last year, he spent the holidays at our house, and this year, we invited him again," Veronica countered in her defense. "Those holidays, Luke spent most of his time at another house, and this year you only invited him because you discovered his 3 auras," Wednesday countered instantly. "Why are you so rude to everyone? Is it because of your goth look?" Veronica asked, realizing she couldn't win the argument and opting to change the subject. "I'm not rude. I just speak the truth, even if you don't like it," Wednesday replied. "Whatever. I just came to see Luke and bring him food, not to talk to you," Veronica said. "Food he can't eat since, as you can see, he's unconscious," Wednesday pointed out. "Food he'll eat when he wakes up," Veronica exclaimed, losing her patience. "You didn't seem very convinced yesterday that Luke would wake up anytime soon," Wednesday retorted. "I changed my mind. I said that yesterday because Luke suffered an EPL. Usually, the periods of unconsciousness can be very long, but he has 3 auras and he's strong. He'll wake up soon, I know it," Veronica said firmly. For the first time, Wednesday agreed with Veronica on something, so she stopped finding fault with everything she said. The room fell silent again. After about 40 minutes, Veronica received a telepathic message from her father. She had to leave. "When he wakes up, give him the food," Veronica said, placing the container on a table. Wednesday said nothing. She glanced at the container for a second before turning her gaze back to Luke. Veronica took that as a yes and left the room without another word. Chapter 162. Post-Battle 2. 2:15 a.m. Luke opened his eyes with difficulty. He felt a bit dizzy, and it took him a few seconds before he could finally focus his vision. "Where am I?" he thought, confused, touching his head and looking around. The room was dark, the only dim light coming from the silvery moonlight streaming through the window. He was lying on one of those typical infirmary beds, and after observing the room a bit more, he remembered this was the Nevermore Infirmary. He noticed a calendar on the wall marking the date, August 17th. 2 days had passed since the lunar eclipse. 2 days unconscious. That's a long time, Luke thought. However, what caught his attention the most was the delicate figure sitting to his right, her eyes closed, breathing at a steady rhythm. It was Wednesday, who had fallen asleep sitting upright. Her pale hands rested gracefully in her lap, as if even in her dreams she refused to lose her composure. It was a truly perfect and stylish way to sleep. Her back was perfectly straight, and her head was tilted just enough for a strand of her dark hair to fall across her cheek. Luke wondered how it was possible for someone to sleep so perfectly, so full of style and elegance. If it were him, he'd likely be sprawled across the chair, head hanging off the backrest, legs awkwardly stretched out, probably snoring with his mouth wide open. But she was different. Perfection, thought Luke, half-dazed as he stared at her. He sighed and scratched his head. Why was he thinking about this after just regaining consciousness after nearly dying? His memories of the battle were already fresh. He came close to dying. If he hadn't obtained true precognition, he wouldn't have been able to avoid Dolores' strike, and that would have been his real end. Luke noticed that much of his body was wrapped in bandages. He quickly gave his legs a light pat and sighed in relief upon feeling both of them. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, thought Luke, nodding, satisfied with the great fight against Crackstone and Dolores. The best battle in his record. The only downside was losing the demonic book, but there was nothing to be done about it now. He couldn't change the past. He hadn't even gotten a good look at Dolores' servant, who had fled with the book. Maybe if he'd seen them take it, he could use his own memory, extract it, and present it as evidence to the outcast police. Luke realized he could already stand, feeling a surprising amount of energy coursing through him. He had expected it would take him longer to be back at 100%, but that wasn't the case. Blessed be his outcast body. He looked at Wednesday again and noticed how her head was starting to tilt forward and back, sinking deeper into sleep. It was strange to see her like that, especially since it wasn't typical of her to fall asleep sitting up. Everything pointed to her having watched over him since he had lost consciousness 2 days ago, and that thought stirred a mix of guilt and tenderness in his chest. Carefully, he raised his hand and used his telekinesis. Wednesday floated gently into the air, as though carried by a soft breeze. Luke made sure not to disrupt the delicate rhythm of her breathing as he guided her toward the bed. He shifted over to the side and carefully settled her next to him. As if the warmth and comfort of the bed instinctively called to her, Wednesday relaxed even further. Her rigid posture gave way, and her delicate frame unconsciously sought the nearest source of warmth. Luke. She slowly nestled against his arm, resting her head on his shoulder and gently tangling a hand in the fabric of his shirt. Luke froze, nervous at Wednesday's sudden involuntary gesture. Minutes passed. Luke didn't move. He stayed awake, trying to keep as still as possible to let Wednesday sleep peacefully. He stared out the window, his thoughts wandering to various topics, occasionally glancing at Wednesday's face, simply because he felt like it. Sometime past 3 a.m, Wednesday's eyes slowly opened. The first thing she saw was Luke's chest, and she was startled by the unexpected view. When had she lain down on the bed next to him? She knew she wasn't a sleepwalker, which only meant one thing. Quickly, she propped herself up slightly and looked at Luke, who had his eyes open. Their gazes met, and silence fell between them. "You're awake," said Wednesday, breaking the quiet.
"Yeah."
"The same could be said for you," replied Luke, and the room went silent again. The two stared at each other without looking away. "Aren't you going to say something?" asked Wednesday.
Huh?
"Your boyfriend was unconscious for 2 days. Why not smile and happily hug me like a normal girlfriend?" said Luke with a smile. Wednesday wanted to roll her eyes but restrained herself, keeping her expression unchanged. She couldn't believe Luke was already starting with his jokes. The demonic book was stolen by the Spellmans. "You blame me?" asked Wednesday, clutching the bedsheet tightly. "What?" said Luke, caught off guard by the question. "I forced you to help me revive Crackstone. I managed to eliminate an enemy of my family, but on the other hand, the Spellmans grew stronger, even though we killed Dolores." "You didn't want to revive Crackstone," Wednesday explained. "You didn't force me to do anything. I chose to help you because I wanted to. It's true that I didn't want to revive Crackstone because I thought the book was better left locked away there, but that wasn't completely safe either. They could have kidnapped any Adams to try and steal the book," said Luke. "But it doesn't matter, Wednesday. We both made the mistake of thinking there wouldn't be one of those bastards keeping an eye on the crypt, Luke interrupted, taking Wednesday's hand. She nodded slightly. I think the best thing would be to tell your parents about the demonic book and the Spellmans, Luke added. Yes, I've thought about it too. It's time to tell them, Wednesday agreed. Her Uncle Fester had killed Dolores, making the feud inevitable, especially knowing that the Spellmans had 2 of the 6 main demonic books in their possession. Her father and the rest needed to be aware of this and prepare accordingly. The room fell silent again until Wednesday spoke. Why? She asked. What do you mean? Luke asked, confused by her sudden question. During the battle against Dolores, I told you to rest and let me handle the rest, but you tricked me. Why did you put yourself in such danger? Didn't you trust that I could kill Dolores? Wednesday asked, her tone carrying a hint of distress, unusual for her. She thought they were a team with great synergy and trust, but it seemed Luke didn't feel the same. I trust you. I just wouldn't let you face danger alone, Luke replied instantly, his tone sincere. That had been his primary motivation during the fight, to kill Dolores and protect Wednesday. He wouldn't allow any unforeseen event to happen in the end. It was true that Dolores was a Spellman, but his drive for revenge had diminished ever since he learned the truth about his parents. However, that didn't mean his hatred for the Spellmans had disappeared entirely. The fight against them was inevitable, but now his main motivation was something else. That motivation was to live his life peacefully with Wednesday, and to achieve that, he needed to eliminate those bastards and protect her. He also wanted to protect the few people who mattered to him, like Natasha, Thing, who he had recently added to the list, and his only 2 friends, Xavier and Ajax. As for the other Adams family members, his relationship with them wasn't deep enough yet to consider them part of his closest circle. Would you go this far for someone you've known for less than a year? Wednesday asked. Why so many questions? Luke thought, sighing internally. I am an orphan. I have few people I care about, and the ones I do have I cling to and want to protect, Luke said, speaking the first thing that came to his mind. Luke didn't realize it, but what he had just said resonated deeply within Wednesday. She stared at him in silence, her dark eyes evaluating him intently. She didn't respond immediately, but something inside her chest felt strange. It was a sensation she usually ignored or suppressed, but this time, she allowed it to flow, a warmth mixed with admiration. Besides, you're not the best person to bring that up. I remember how you used yourself as a human shield. If it hadn't been for your Uncle Fester, you would have been hurt, or worse, died, Luke added with frustration, clenching his fists tightly. At that moment, there would have been no way to stop Wednesday, who had appeared in front of him through shadow travel. Wednesday remembered that moment vividly. Her intention had been to protect Luke, even if it meant using her own body as a shield. I suppose I want to protect you too, since you're one of the few people I care about, Wednesday said softly. Wednesday had a large family on both her mother's and father's sides. However, she would only lay down her life for her immediate family, her father, her mother, her uncle, her brother, Thing, Lurch, and her grandmother Eudora. A while ago, she had added Luke to that list. As for the rest of her relatives, she wouldn't give her life for them so easily. Her bond with them wasn't deep enough to warrant such a sacrifice. Could you repeat that? I didn't hear you clearly, Luke said, leaning closer to Wednesday. He had heard her perfectly, but wanted to hear it again. I know you heard me, but I'll say it again. I want to protect you, and you're one of the few people I care about the most, Wednesday repeated, her expression unblemished as always. Saying this had been incredibly difficult for her. She never voiced such feelings. In fact, this might have been the first time she had ever done so. Repeating it wasn't easy either, but she had done it because of what Luke had said earlier. Luke swallowed hard, feeling a knot form in his throat. He had Natasha, Thing, Xavier, and Ajax, but with them, it had never reached this level. He had never told them what they truly meant to him, and he had never heard anything similar from them. Their relationships were implicit, built on actions rather than words. For the first time, he felt something reciprocal. It wasn't just him protecting, caring for, or clinging to someone. Someone wanted to protect him too. Thanks, Luke said softly. By the way, how did you get me into your bed? Wednesday asked, abruptly changing the topic. Enough emotional talk. With telekinesis. What else? Luke replied as if it were obvious. You suffered in PLP. That's why you were unconscious for 2 days. Do you even know what that means? Wednesday asked, narrowing her eyes. Luke looked at her in confusion. PLP? Is that some kind of rare disease or something? Wednesday sighed, as if explaining something basic to a child. Post-limit psychic exhaustion. Basically, you drained all your psychic energy and kept using your powers even though you had nothing left in the tank. It's like, think of your powers as your muscles. When you train, you reach failure, extreme fatigue. If you rest, you recover and get stronger. But if you keep training nonstop, ignoring the pain and exhaustion, you tear yourself apart. Your muscles literally break down. The same thing happens with your psychic energy. Luke frowned, processing her words. So it's like a breakdown? But in my head. Wednesday nodded, her expression serious. Exactly. The more you use your powers when you're at your limit, the worse it gets. And we're not talking about a simple strain. We're talking unconsciousness, a coma, or worse. Luckily, this time it was just 2 days. But the nurse and Professor Fitz said you could have been out for a month or longer. A month? Luke thought, shocked. It was that or die. Look, I'm fine after 2 days. Better than ever. Actually, Luke said, making several objects from a distant table levitate. Wednesday watched with a mix of surprise and annoyance as the objects floated through the air, spinning in a controlled pattern that demonstrated Luke's precision. Do you really think that's a good idea? You should be resting, not showing off, Wednesday scolded him. Luke stacked the objects, balancing them perfectly. I'm fine. I know my body, he said with a faint smile. You were unconscious for 2 days. That's not an achievement. It's a warning. Your body shut down to stop you from completely destroying it, Wednesday said, glaring at him. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? Luke said, shrugging. Wednesday raised an eyebrow, clearly irritated. That's what idiots say right before something kills them. I'm not nagging you for fun, Luke. The battles ahead will be harder, and if you keep pushing yourself to the limit, your body won't hold up. Recovering quickly doesn't mean you're invincible. It means your body is resilient, but every time you push it like this, you're playing with fire. And eventually, you're going to get burned, Wednesday said seriously. Fine, I get it. I won't put my life on the line unless it's 100% necessary, Luke replied. You better not. Because if you end up paralyzed and I have to push your wheelchair, I'll kill you to end your suffering, Wednesday said, and Luke pulled a strange expression. Was that her way of showing love and concern? At that moment, Luke's stomach growled. I'm hungry, Luke said, placing a hand on his abdomen. Wednesday glanced at the container of food Veronica had left earlier and decided to make use of it. Did you make this? Luke asked, seeing Wednesday sit back down on the bed with a container that, when opened, released a delicious smell. No. Veronica made it. She visited you the days you were unconscious for about 45 minutes. You also have a couple of letters, I suppose from your friends, Wednesday replied without lying. I'll thank her later and read the letters, Luke said, more interested in filling his stomach. Chapter 163. Anonymous Fan. Past 6 in the morning, the rays of the sun filtered through the window panes and landed on the bed where Luke and Wednesday rested. The two of them had spent almost 2 hours talking since Luke regained consciousness. They hadn't informed anyone else because a morning checkup was scheduled for 8 o'clock, and they'd find out then. Besides, the two of them wanted to talk alone. Luke could send a telepathic message to Natasha to have her come, but he knew Wednesday would get angry if he did. She insisted he rest after suffering in PLP. She was bossy and strict in that regard. Additionally, Natasha would likely scold him as well for using his powers after such an event. Damn PLP, I can't use my powers without getting scolded, Luke thought. Although Wednesday's concern for him gave him a pleasant feeling, he had even managed to get her to feed him. Of course, he had to pretend his arms hurt and that he couldn't eat on his own. Wednesday was sleeping in her usual coffin-like position, deeply and soundly. When the sunlight hit her, she instinctively sought shelter, hiding her head against Luke's arm, breaking her usual posture. Luke hugged her to shield her from the sunlight. He had to take advantage of the opportunity to hold her. Situations like this didn't come around often. Since she hadn't slept in 2 days, she was exhausted and ended up sleeping with Luke after their conversation. One of the topics they discussed was Wednesday recounting what had happened after Luke lost consciousness. Raven Island, burning and with intermittent explosions, had caught the attention of the staff overseeing Nevermore as it fell under their jurisdiction. Consequently, Larissa, accompanied by several teachers and marginal police agents, arrived shortly after Dolores' death. When the marginal police agents learned about Crackstone's resurrection, the situation became far more serious than anyone had anticipated, prompting more people to arrive at Nevermore. To everyone's relief and surprise, Crackstone had been murdered, and the sole purpose of his resurrection seemed to have been to kill him. As a result, there weren't significant legal complications since Adams had settled the old grudge tied to their family. As for Dolores' interference, it wasn't something that required extensive investigation. It also stemmed from another grudge involving one of the individuals responsible for reviving Crackstone. Wednesday underwent a simple interrogation, primarily to clarify a few details. The only thing that could be considered a crime was the ritual she and Luke had performed, which required mutilated body parts from various corpses. This ritual was public knowledge due to the last blood moon. The marginal police already knew the limbs were needed for the ritual, and it was a crime on both the normie and outcast sides if innocent victims were harmed. However, Wednesday had prepared for this. One of her contingency plans accounted for the possibility of killing Crackstone while the marginal police arrived at the scene and witnessed it. When she and Luke killed the gang members to obtain the limbs, Wednesday made sure to gather evidence proving the gang members had attempted to kill them. This established that they had acted in self-defense, and for the marginal police, the evidence was sufficient. Luke glanced at Wednesday, her face barely visible as it was tucked against his arm. He ensured she was soundly asleep before extending his domain to locate a table beyond his line of sight. There, he spotted 3 items of interest: his phone and 2 letters. Did they really send me a letter? In 2022, thought Luke as he used his telekinesis to bring the items toward him. When Wednesday mentioned he had received letters, he assumed she meant messages or emails. Knowing how outdated she was when it came to technology, he thought she was still using the term letter to refer to electronic messages in this day and age. As for his phone, Natasha had brought it, or so Wednesday had said. Luke wasn't stupid. If he had taken it to the fight against Crackstone, his brand new iPhone would have been destroyed. Luke unlocked his phone first. It was flooded with notifications, both from messages to his personal number and on his main social media accounts, though he was used to the latter. There were messages from Xavier, Ajax, and other classmates who had somehow gotten his number. Even Gia, an old fling of his, had messaged him, asking if he was okay and mentioning she'd heard the news through her friend, Erica. Xavier and Ajax had sent him dozens of messages and had called him multiple times. Luke understood why they had sent so many messages. Only a few people knew he had fallen into an unconscious state, meaning the PLP. It was more serious than he'd initially thought. "I'm fine. Hadn't PLP, but I'm awake now. Lucky, I guess. I'll explain more later." Luke sent a message to the group chat he shared with the 2 of them. He then took the time to reply to other classmates, especially those he was closer to, like the ones he shared the psychic powers class with. Having finished that, Luke picked up the letter dated 2 days ago, right when he had fallen into unconsciousness. "Let's see what this is," he thought as he opened the letter. Curiosity piqued. "Dear Luke, I'm writing this letter to wish you a swift recovery. I know you've suffered in PLP, and it's possible you won't read this letter or respond to it anyway, as you wouldn't know where to send a reply. With your incredible achievements, I know you'll overcome this, but even so, I'll pray every day, hoping you'll open your eyes. Sending you many kisses. Signed, your #1 fan." Luke's expression shifted to one of confusion as he finished reading the letter. Why on earth was someone writing to him in such a formal tone? And who in the world had written this? A fan? Were they a fan of his published works? The letter didn't mention any of them. All it said was that they wished for his recovery. It couldn't have been a normie, as none of them knew he had fought and nearly died. It had to be someone from the Society of Outcasts. Additionally, they knew he had suffered in PLP, something not everyone was aware of. This is weird. When did I get my first stalkers? Luke thought as he folded the letter and opened the next one. Dear Luke, it's me again. I'm writing this so that, once you regain consciousness and read this, you'll know that there was always someone hoping for your recovery. Unfortunately, this might be the last letter I can send you that will reach you, as otherwise, I might risk revealing my identity. Along with the letter, I've sent you a small gift, something to fill your stomach. That's all. I will continue praying for you, even though I won't be able to send more letters to tell you so. Sending you many kisses. Signed, your #1 fan. Luke furrowed his brows slightly. This fan was very odd. Who the hell says, I will continue praying for you? He or she must be religious. Using his telekinesis, he focused again on the table where he had picked up the letters and his phone. There was a fruit basket sitting there. That must be the gift this person sent. He brought the basket over to him with his telekinesis. It was medium-sized, filled with bananas, apples, and grapes. He picked up a red apple and sniffed it carefully. He had to make sure these fruits weren't poisoned or anything. He didn't want to end up like Snow White, falling unconscious like a princess after taking a bite of a juicy apple. Doesn't seem like there's anything wrong, Luke thought, taking a bite of the apple. His so-called #1 fan seemed overly concerned about his health, almost too much, to the point of being a little creepy. It would be strange if their real intention was to kill him. Such a roundabout method of murder would be odd. The apple was delicious, and nothing happened to him, so he continued eating it while looking at the letter again. Who could this fan be? He wondered. It must be an outcast working for the council who was sent here and found out I suffered in PLP, or maybe a relative of someone who knows about it and learned through them, thought Luke, slightly intrigued but not overly concerned. He didn't have time to solve this little mystery, and the person seemed to have good intentions toward him while wanting to keep their identity hidden, so he decided not to actively pursue the matter. Wednesday woke up before 8. Her sleepy face was very cute, Luke thought. She scolded him a little when she found out he'd used his powers to bring the phone and other items to the bed. It's better for you to walk than to use your psychic powers, Wednesday said with a sharp glare. Sorry, boss. It won't happen again, Luke replied, feigning remorse. I don't believe a single word you're saying, Wednesday said, frowning. Don't scold me. I'm too tired from using my powers, Luke said in a weary voice, as he wrapped his arms around Wednesday's waist and gently rested his head against her abdomen, as if seeking comfort. Wednesday, who was about to continue reprimanding him, sighed inwardly and allowed the gesture. With her fingers, she began to softly stroke Luke's hair. Why is it so hard to scold him? Thought Wednesday, struggling against the urge to push him away and make a cutting remark. Not even with her younger brother did she allow such spoiled child behavior. If she needed to reprimand someone and point out their mistakes, she would do so without hesitation. If Luke hadn't suffered in PLP, she wouldn't be so lenient with him. Luke realized this and knew he needed to make the most of the situation. He was starting to drift off to sleep under Wednesday's gentle strokes in his hair. It was a soothing and pleasant feeling. Unfortunately, the sound of the infirmary door opening interrupted the moment as someone headed toward them. Wednesday immediately pulled away and stood up. Luke didn't mind. He knew she would never show others, not even her parents, how affectionate she could be with him. She always maintained a cold demeanor and an expression devoid of emotion in front of others. Luke adjusted himself in the patient bed and waited for the group of people to arrive. Chapter 164. Enid's Obsession. Sonoma County, Sebastopol, California. Sebastopol is a small town with a population of less than 8,000. Its main streets are dotted with small shops, artisanal cafes, and local art galleries. The day in Sebastopol was very cloudy, as if a heavy rain could start pouring down at any moment. Not far from the town center, in the more remote areas, the scenery changes. Among the rolling hills and oak forests lies a very peculiar house at the end of a winding dirt road. The house is built with weathered wood and filled with irregular additions that give it an eccentric charm. There are also pigs playing in the mud, cows grazing peacefully, and chickens running around between the pens. Inside the house, which has 3 floors and is taller than it is wide, a large family is having lunch in the dining room. The long table was covered with plates of juicy, rare steaks. A total of 6 people were seated, 4 men and 2 women. 3 of the men were teenagers, loud and messy eaters, joking around with each other. The other man, middle-aged, ate quietly and calmly, used to the noise his sons made. One of the women was middle-aged and also ate quietly, accustomed to the commotion. Her gaze settled on the blonde girl sitting across from her. "Why aren't you eating, Enid?" the woman asked, looking at the nearly untouched steak on her daughter's plate. She was Esther, Enid's mother and the mother of the boisterous boys. Her daughter had been acting strange throughout the holidays, with less appetite than usual and a more subdued mood compared to her usual enthusiastic and cheerful self. Esther knew the reason for this, but didn't want to bring it up. It was better for her daughter to forget about him entirely. "I'm not very hungry," Enid replied, staring at her plate. "If you're not eating it, I will." "I won't let Daisy's meat go to waste," one of Enid's brothers said, stabbing the steak with his fork and moving it to his plate, which already held 3 steaks. Daisy had been one of the cows they cared for on their farm. She was slaughtered earlier that day, and now they were eating her. He wouldn't let poor Daisy's meat go to waste. Enid didn't care that her brother had taken her steak. In the past, she would have given him a beating. She never let anyone touch her food. Only one person had ever been allowed to. That memory made her frown, her expression tinged with sadness. "I'm going to my room," Enid said, dropping her utensils and standing up. Within a few breaths, she had left the dining room, and her always noisy brothers fell silent, watching her leave. "Dylan, you idiot. You shouldn't have stolen her food," one of Enid's brothers shouted, smacking Dylan hard on the head, nearly making him face-plant into his plate. Enid's 3 brothers are a rare case of trizygotic triplets, meaning they are genetically distinct. While they share familial traits, they are far from identical. All 3 are about to start their final year of high school at Nevermore. Then there's their older brother Andrew, who graduated last year, the same year the hooded figures attacked the Poe Cup. "Shut up. It's not my fault," Dylan shouted, trying to punch his brother Eric, but his blow was skillfully dodged, leading to a scuffle. "You're too young to try and hit me, Dylan," Eric said with a grin. "You're only older by a minute. Stop fighting. We're in our final year now. You should start acting mature." "Being the oldest can feel lonely sometimes," William said, shaking his head. "You're only older than me by 15 seconds. Don't let it go to your head," Eric replied, glancing at William for a moment before returning his focus to wrestling with Dylan. "Why has our sister been acting so strange these holidays?" William wondered aloud, resting a hand on his chin. Not only was she acting odd, but it was as if she were melancholic and sad. He didn't like seeing her that way, but he wasn't particularly good at dealing with feelings and emotions. "Maybe it's because she's not eating her daily protein intake?" Eric suggested, without taking his eyes off Dylan, who scowled disdainfully at the comment. "Don't be an idiot. It's obvious why she's acting like that," Dylan said. "Why?" Eric and William asked in unison. "Luke Poe," Dylan replied, and the dining room fell silent once again. Eric stopped wrestling with Dylan, his expression becoming more serious than usual. "Don't say that name again," Esther said, finally breaking her silence and stepping into the conversation. The triplets exchanged knowing glances. On the first day of the holidays, their mother and sister had a huge argument. The shouting didn't stop for 2 hours, and the atmosphere had been tense for days afterward. Since they argued loudly and didn't care if others in the house overheard, the triplets learned the reason for the fight: Esther's interference in Enid's relationship with Luke Poe. None of them said another word. Their mother could be terrifyingly strict when it came to certain matters. It was best not to anger her. That boy does nothing but get into trouble. Reviving Crackstone and then killing him? What's next? Esther complained aloud. Her words sounded more like an attempt to convince herself that interfering in Enid and Luke's relationship had been the right decision. Andrew said Raven Island is in ruins. It would have been amazing to see that fight, Dylan commented. Like any good werewolf, he loved thrilling, life-or-death battles. Damn it. Another year without the Poe Cup, William complained. He had hoped to make his final year glorious by winning the competition, but now it seemed unlikely with Raven Island in such a state. He said his last name. Punish him, Mom. Eric tattled immediately, making William frown. Fortunately, their mother wasn't paying much attention to them and seemed more focused on her own monologue. He suffered in PLP and still can't stop putting his life at risk. At least this time, no innocents were involved, Esther continued. She knew about this thanks to her eldest son, Andrew, who worked for the council, specifically in the Department of Dangerous Outcasts Containment. He had been among the staff sent to the island after everything that happened there. Ahem, Murray coughed, giving his wife a reproachful look. I don't wish anything bad to happen to him. I'm just saying, Esther said, calming herself. She felt conflicted about Luke Poe. On one hand, she believed he could put her daughter in danger because of his old grudge with the Spellmans. On the other hand, she felt grateful to him. Grateful because, thanks to him, her daughter had become a werewolf and a prodigy. She wasn't a late bloomer and was one of the strongest werewolves in her grade, even managing to defeat a Hyde. A remarkable achievement. Enid entered her room, ignoring whatever her family might be whispering about her. She didn't turn on the lights and went straight to her desk, which was messier than usual for her. She cleared some space and opened her laptop. In a program, she began typing. In less than 5 minutes, she was done. And PLP that could last a month or more. He's always so reckless, Enid thought. And after that thought, she sighed and rested her forehead on the desk, feeling the cool wood and the clutter of papers and uncapped pens. Why did she still care about him? It had all ended months ago. She had been rejected, and on top of that, she had said horrible things to him. Why did she still care when he had broken his promise and kissed Wednesday Addams? A girl she thought was her friend. She had put in so much effort to get closer to her Gothic classmate, and in the end, things had turned out like this. She had even befriended Thing, and now she wouldn't get to see the friendly hand anymore. At first, when Luke broke his promise and chose Wednesday, her anger had kept her going. A burning fury that masked her sadness. Her anger reached its peak when she saw him dancing with Wednesday at the Nevermore ball. Didn't you hate dancing? Why with her and not with me? Enid thought, clenching her teeth tightly as she watched the scene from a corner. She felt betrayed in so many ways she couldn't even count them all. Lying bastard. Womanizer. But when the holidays came and she stopped seeing him, something inside her changed. The anger quickly faded, replaced by a feeling of longing. At first, she tried to ignore it, but as the days went by, that feeling deepened. It wasn't just missing him. It was a desperate need to see him, to know he was okay, to hear his voice. Enid began finding excuses to think about him, replaying past conversations in her mind, moments when Luke had shown a small glimpse of his more vulnerable side. No matter how much she wanted to hate him, those bittersweet memories clung to her heart, refusing to disappear. She started counting down the days until Nevermore would begin again, so she could see him. However, what if he didn't return to Nevermore? Would she never see him again? Just the thought of it made her chest ache terribly. She couldn't hate Luke. The anger she had felt vanished, leaving only love in its place. When she learned about the fight against Crackstone that Luke was involved in, she became deeply worried, a concern she couldn't deny. Luckily, her brother Andrew was sent to Nevermore to investigate what had happened and spoke with him personally. That's how she found out about Luke's PLP, which frightened her even more. What if he never wakes up? What if she never sees him again? With those thoughts swirling in her mind, Enid felt an urge to go to Nevermore immediately. But then she remembered that Wednesday would be the one taking care of him, and she stopped herself. Still, that didn't deter her. She simply looked for another approach. What if, back then, I hadn't looked at him with fear? Enid wondered. Maybe she would have been the one taking care of him now. Her phone started ringing, pulling her out of that swarm of thoughts and emotions. Seeing the name Andrew, she answered right away. Any news? Enid asked immediately, her tone far more eager than when she had spoken in the dining room. "Hello, sister." "I'm fine. Thanks for asking," Andrew replied, pretending to be hurt. Yeah, whatever," Enid said impatiently. "Phew. Yes, there's news." He woke up, Andrew said with a sigh. "What?" Enid exclaimed, standing up from her desk in surprise. She hadn't expected such news. It had only been almost 3 days. Had the doctors been wrong about the diagnosis? Not that it mattered to Enid. The important thing was that he had regained consciousness. A happy smile spread across her face, and a tear escaped from one of her blue eyes. "That's great," Enid said, her tone filled with emotion as she sat back down in her chair. "Yes, great," Andrew echoed, his tone far less enthusiastic than hers. "Little sister, you should forget about him as soon as possible. The sooner you get over this breakup, the less you'll suffer. There are plenty of fish in the sea," Andrew added, sounding concerned. For his sister's sake, he had become something of a double agent, tasked with updating her daily on Luke's condition and other unconventional errands. "I've already chosen my fish," Enid murmured, more to herself than as a response to Andrew. "What did you say?" "I didn't hear." "Nothing." "Thanks for the information," Enid said quickly, ending the call and once again sinking into her thoughts in the darkness of her room. The happiness she had felt upon learning that Luke had woken up began to fade. What good was it if she could never be with him again? Not that she wanted him to remain unconscious forever, but wouldn't everyone think it was foolish for her to feel happy when Luke was clearly happy with Wednesday? She leaned back against the chair, lost in silent contemplation. An hour passed, maybe more, when a soft knock on the door broke the heavy silence. Enid blinked, as if waking from a trance. She hesitated for a moment before standing up and opening the door. Her father, Murray, was there. He didn't say a word, simply extended his hand toward her, offering a carefully folded note. "What's this?" Enid asked, but her father didn't answer. He just gave her a knowing look and a small, complicit smile. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving her alone with the note. Enid closed the door and returned to her desk. She switched on the lamp to read the note. The note contained a single word: fight. She stared at it for a moment, feeling something stir deep inside her. That word echoed in her mind like a reverberation. Enid pressed the note against her chest, closing her eyes. She couldn't stop loving Luke, nor could she rid herself of the feelings that bound her to him. But she could choose not to sink any further. She could choose to stand up, even if it hurt, even if the path ahead seemed impossible. "Fine, I'll fight," she murmured to herself, a small glimmer of determination lighting up her eyes. If she couldn't stop loving him, she would have to win him back with all her strength. After that, she made a call on her phone. "Hi, Yoko. Remember the invitation to Ajax's birthday party? I'll go with you." "That's great, Enid. I'm sure we'll have a blast, and you might meet someone new." "Just ignore that idiot Poe," Yoko said excitedly. After chatting a bit more, Enid ended the call and lay down on her bed. Ajax's 16th birthday would be before the break. Now that Luke was conscious again, he would likely attend. "We'll see each other soon, Luke," Enid thought, a nearly maniacal smile curling her lips as her hand reached for the handkerchief resting near her pillow. It was the same handkerchief Luke had lent her the first day they met. She had kept it unwashed since then. The faint scent of him rose from the handkerchief, flooding her enhanced sense of smell with memories of what once was. Enid closed her eyes, inhaling deeply, immersing herself in the sensation of being close to him, even if only through a simple piece of fabric. Chapter 165. The Adams Enter the Game. Luke was returning to Adams Manor in the peculiar Adams family limousine driven by Lurch. Fortunately for Luke, he was discharged immediately after Nurse and Professor Fitz conducted an intense examination. They realized Luke had already recovered from the PLP. When they saw Luke awake, their faces turned to confusion and doubt. It was as if they were seeing a ghost. It was amusing to see their expressions, and Luke also gathered from their reactions that in PLP was a serious matter, which explained why Wednesday was so strict about the use of his psychic powers. However, after the examination confirmed he was in excellent condition, they cleared him and told him he could use his powers unless he noticed anything unusual or out of the ordinary. Sitting next to Luke was Wednesday, staring straight ahead with her usual emotionless expression. Unlike the previous trip to Adam's Manor, this time, Fester was accompanying them, seated between Morticia and Gomez. Luke appreciated this seating arrangement, as it prevented Gomez and Morticia from starting their affectionate displays, with Fester acting like a dividing mountain between the two. "So," said Morticia, breaking the silence after nearly 5 minutes of just glances in a tense atmosphere. "First, you two sneaked into my study to copy the resurrection ritual. Second, you killed normie criminal gangs to collect limbs. And third, you resurrected Crackstone and killed him. Though that wasn't the end, because you encountered Dolores Spellman, who nearly killed them," Morticia said, listing all the events succinctly. Luke avoided making eye contact with Morticia. Were they about to get scolded? He and Wednesday had acted recklessly for their age. Would Wednesday's parents blame him, like Enid's mother had, saying it was his fault her daughter nearly died? Wednesday looked at her mother without a hint of guilt or shame for breaking into her private study and rummaging through her things. She would do it again, if necessary. During the 2 days she had been at Nevermore, she hadn't left Luke's side, which spared her from this bothersome conversation. Before she could respond with, "So what?" her father spoke up loudly, his booming laughter filling the space. "Ha ha ha. That's my guys. Well done." Gomez laughed. As Gomez laughed, Fester joined in, his laughter unstoppable. Unlike Gomez's, Fester's laugh was like the creaking of an old door, with an erratic rhythm that made it eerie. Luke glanced at the bald, extremely pale man, so pale he almost looked sickly, with a strange expression. Thanks to this man, they had survived Dolores and managed to defeat her. Luke had never imagined meeting Uncle Fester in such a way. His appearance had been a great blessing and stroke of luck. Luke wanted to kiss his bald head in gratitude but figured it would be too strange, though perhaps not for the Addams family. "This reminds me of our own mischief, brother," exclaimed Gomez, calming his laughter, but still wearing a broad smile. Fester nodded with a nostalgic expression. "Remember, Gomez? That time we summoned the spirit of Barnabas Addams in the family cemetery. How could I forget? We were 14 and had to fight for over 2 hours before that old geezer with Alzheimer recognized us as Addams," said Gomez, giving his own leg an enthusiastic slap. "Though bringing Crackstone back to life is much more impressive," Gomez added, looking back at his daughter and Luke with pride. "They've definitely outdone us, brother," said Fester, stroking his chin as if pondering the magnitude of the feat Luke hadn't expected to be praised. He thought they'd scold him for such a dangerous act, but instead, they were putting him on a pedestal. It wasn't bad at all. Wednesday wasn't surprised by this. She had already anticipated her family's reaction. She knew them too well. "Let's get back on track," Morticia interrupted Fester and Gomez, who had begun reminiscing about their teenage exploits. "Your plan was perfect up until the point when you killed Crackstone. You did everything well, but why was Dolores Spellman there?" Morticia asked, fixing her gaze on Luke and Wednesday. Morticia knew something was missing. Why would Dolores be in the Nevermore crypt and ambush them after they killed Crackstone? It was too much of a coincidence. How did she know that Luke and Wednesday were going to resurrect Crackstone? And why was she in Jericho? She knew her daughter and Luke had flown to Jericho at night, making it impossible for Luke's enemies to have discovered their plans. Luke and Wednesday exchanged glances for a few seconds. "You explain it to them," Wednesday said through their telepathic link. "She was there because—" Luke began, launching into an explanation that lasted several minutes. Gomez and Fester's expressions grew more serious as Luke recounted his statements about the family's dealings with demons. Luke based his explanation on the brief memory scan he managed to perform on Atlas before Atlas's brain exploded. That's when Luke uncovered the true motive behind the Spellman's revival of Crackstone. They were after the demonic book hidden in the crypt, which was why Dolores was there. Most likely, she had been watching the place who knows for how many days, or perhaps she was there because of the lunar eclipse. They would never know for sure. Luke left out the beginning of the story, which started with Edgar fighting against Edward and his brother. He only mentioned that the war between the Poes and the Spellmans stemmed from the former discovering the satanic dealings of the latter. The undeniable proof he witnessed was the memory scan he performed on Atlas, in which Elliot, the current patriarch, instructed Atlas to retrieve the demonic Soiga book under any circumstances. Whether they believed him or not was their problem. Wednesday had already believed Luke, even before this. She trusted him after he explained everything to her in the woods of Jericho, following their observation of the original cult house where Atlas and his group were staying. The Spellmans making deals with demons? Morticia murmured more to herself than to anyone else, her gaze fixed on the car floor as she sank into thought. Gomez and Fester were also deep in thought. If this were true, it would be serious indeed for one of the 6 great psychic families to be conspiring with demons. I know you saw a peculiar book in Crackstone's hands, but it's hard to believe it could be one of the 6 primary demonic books, Morticia commented after a few seconds of silence. Those books are exceedingly rare. Some haven't been seen in hundreds of years. They don't just appear out of nowhere. A book from a mid-level demon couldn't have given him that much power. Crackstone was a weak normie. It would be impossible for him to reach such heights of power with a book from a mid-level demon. I fought him, so I know, Wednesday said, speaking for the first time, her tone as cutting as ever. And how do you know how powerful a mid-level demon's book would be? Morticia asked with a faint smile. I've seen records, Wednesday replied. Darling, it seems you'll need to improve the security of your office, Morticia said, glancing at Gomez, who merely smiled faintly, without saying a word. Besides, what does it matter if it was one of the primary demonic books or one from a mid-level demon? The Spellmans were there to steal a demonic book. That was their goal from the start, along with wanting to kill Luke. So, their connection to demons is obvious, Wednesday stated firmly, and silence once again filled the space. For Morticia, it was hard to believe that a family like the Spellmans would make deals with demons. It was a huge taboo, one even Goody Adams never crossed, despite her book being incredibly dark. Her own family, the Frumps, were supremacists and enamored with Whitegraft, but her mother had always been very strict about the subject of demons. It was a line that could not be crossed. However, what Wednesday had shared was damning for the Spellmans, and Morticia believed her daughter wholeheartedly. The Adams were aware that Crackstone had made deals with some demon to gain his powers, but none of them believed he had obtained one of the 6 primary books. Goody Adams had never mentioned anything about that. Even Edgar, one of the brightest leaders the Department of Demon Extermination ever had, didn't know about it. He, too, believed that Crackstone had made a deal with a mid-level demon. Whether they stole the Soiga book or a mid-level one, we don't know what purpose they'll use it for. But if they want it so desperately, it can't be for anything good, Morticia concluded. I guess there's no other choice, Gomez said with a crooked smile. What do you mean? Luke couldn't help but ask, not understanding Gomez's comment. That the Adams family is getting involved in the feud between the Poes and the Spellmans. Gomez replied, his smile widening. I can already smell the war brewing, Fester said, inhaling deeply with a maniacal grin. I suppose it's inevitable, Morticia added with a faint smile and a glimmer in her eyes. That easy? Luke thought, surprised. He didn't even have solid evidence, just his and Wednesday's words. What Luke didn't understand was the faith Gomez and the others had in Wednesday's words. They took her statements as gospel, and if she believed in Luke, why wouldn't they? Wednesday gave a slight nod, satisfied with how things had unfolded. She wasn't stupid. A war against the Spellmans couldn't be fought by just her, Luke, and Natasha. While she typically preferred handling matters on her own, she wasn't so stubborn when it came to something this delicate. By the way, why didn't you come to my birthday? Wednesday asked, abruptly changing the subject and fixing Fester with an icy stare. Fester's excitement about the imminent war vanished as he quickly began explaining why he had missed her birthday. I got sidetracked on my way. I knew it was your birthday and wanted to get you a special gift. It worked out perfectly when I ran into a hide that had killed over 15 people near the Canadian border. The bastard was slipperier than I expected, and it took me a bit longer to hunt him down. That's why I was late, Fester explained, gesturing animatedly with his hands. When I got there, you weren't home, so I started looking for you and eventually tracked you to Jericho. The rest, you already know, Fester finished, giving a few taps to a rusty bracelet on his left wrist. Stupid piece of junk, Fester muttered, giving the rusty bracelet several more knocks. Finally, after a few hits, the bracelet spat out a black bag containing something round. Here, happy 16th birthday, Wednesday, Fester said with a smile, handing her the black bag. Wednesday took the bag, placed it on her lap, and opened it. Staring back at her were large, lifeless, reddish eyes. It was the head of a hide. To hang in your room, Fester added. Nice, Wednesday said, examining the head with what seemed to be a mix of morbid admiration and satisfaction. Her fingers traced the creature's rough features. Luke wasn't paying attention to the charming scene of his girlfriend inspecting a grotesque creature's head with obvious delight. He was still stunned by how easily the Addams family had accepted the notion that the Spellmans were making deals with demons. Even Gomez had outright declared they would get involved in the war. Luke had just achieved something no Poe had managed before, convincing a psychic family to join the war against the Spellmans. And not just any family, one of the 6 great ones. Natasha. Looks like we've got reinforcements, Luke said through their telepathic link. What? Natasha replied, confused, as she listened to music while tailing the Addams limousine closely. Chapter 166. Is the love triangle back? After arriving at the Addams mansion, Luke went to his room and had a video call with Xavier and Ajax. The call had been going on for over an hour. Both of them asked about everything that happened during the lunar eclipse and wanted many details about the fights against Crackstone and Dolores. Incredible. You really don't take a break, not even during vacations, Ajax commented with an amazed expression. Count us in next time, Xavier said, sounding a little hurt. It would have been great to participate in the battle. They both would have been great support, and in the fight against Dolores, Luke wouldn't have suffered in PLP. You know how Wednesday is. She's very meticulous and wants to keep everything as secret as possible, Luke explained. He had thought about asking his 2 best friends for help, but Wednesday didn't want them involved. She said their strength wouldn't make a difference in the fight. Luke was being kind, as Wednesday had been much ruder when describing Xavier and Ajax's abilities. Luke didn't push the matter further since it would have been too complicated for the 2 of them to travel to Jericho. They didn't have a flight ability, and they might have raised suspicion if, for some reason, the Spellmans were monitoring people close to Luke. It was a highly paranoid idea, but not impossible. In the end, if Wednesday had agreed, the fight against Dolores wouldn't have been as dangerous with Xavier and Ajax there. It would have been a 4 versus 1, and his 2 friends weren't useless sacks of potatoes. And you're telling me I'm controlled by Bianca, said Xavier with a teasing smile. I'm not controlled by Wednesday, Luke replied indignantly at such a comparison. In other news, though not so new, Xavier had gotten back together with Bianca. There's a saying that people go back to where they were happiest. In this specific case, Luke believed it was a bad decision, but it was better not to bring Xavier down. If he's happy, let him be, even if it's only for a short time. Luke would be there when things went wrong again. I'm surprised you're even talking to us after suffering in PLP. They say it's really dangerous, Ajax said, showing little interest in the conversation about his friend's girlfriends. He was happily single and didn't want to hear how controlling Wednesday and Bianca were. That's true, Xavier chimed in. The night of last year's Harvest Festival, Rowan nearly had won. He was in the hospital for a week. It was only a near PLP, and he still took longer to recover than you. Yeah, I remember that. Rowan was pale as a ghost. Plus, he also got hit by the hide. But you, Luke, you not only suffered a full PLP but woke up in 2 days and got discharged the same day. That's not exactly normal, Ajax added. Perks of having 3 auras, I guess, Luke said with a faint smile. Yeah, super cool, Mr. 3 auras. End of discussion. Let's move on, Xavier said with a hint of envy. Every psychic would envy a 3 aura user. The important thing was that Luke had recovered from the PLP. My 16th birthday, Ajax said enthusiastically. Oh, right. Are you celebrating? Luke asked, taking a sip from his Coke can. Of course I'm celebrating. I'm not a party pooper like you, who did nothing, Ajax replied. Luke made a slight grimace. Like Wednesday, he wasn't a fan of big parties. Besides, he didn't even have a house to host everyone. If he rented one, he might get attacked by the Spellmans, and it could turn into a massive brawl with plenty of injuries and casualties. A party that Wednesday would surely enjoy. It'll be at my house on the last Saturday before Nevermore starts. A big party. My uncle got me loads of alcohol, Ajax said with a smile, already imagining how epic his 16th birthday party would be. Great, Luke said, not too enthusiastic about alcohol. As for an adult relative providing alcohol to his 16-year-old nephew, it didn't seem strange to him. After all, they were outcasts. Isn't your birthday on Friday? Luke asked. Yeah, but that day I'm celebrating with my family. The real party will be on Saturday, Ajax replied.
Ajax, about that,
Xavier said, with a look that Luke found strange. What about it? Luke asked. Oh, yeah, turns out Enid's coming to the party. That's Xavier's fault, not mine, Ajax said, immediately washing his hands of any blame. Hey, it's fine. It's not like I can forbid you from inviting her just because she's my ex, Luke said, trying to sound as indifferent as possible. Xavier was back together with Bianca, who was friends with Divina, who was friends with Yoko, who was Enid's best friend. Besides, Ajax was inviting their entire class, Gorgons, psychics, vampires, and more. It would have been far too petty and spiteful to deny Enid an invitation when everyone else was going to the party. That was easy. So, are you coming with Wednesdays? Ajax asked. It's unlikely she'd want to attend such a party, but I'll ask her, Luke replied without making any promises. Maybe if he mentioned that Enid was going to the party, Wednesday might show her jealous and possessive side and decide to go. Luke wasn't sure, but he could try and see what happened. With everything discussed, the call ended, and Luke headed to Wednesday's room. He knocked twice on the door, and upon hearing her voice say, "Come in," he entered. Wednesday was sitting upright in her chair at her desk, looking at two pieces of paper. Luke immediately recognized them as the letters she'd received from her #1 fan. Luke had told Wednesday about the letters, and her detective instincts had kicked in. She asked him for the letters, to examine them for herself. She hadn't been too pleased when she read the line, "I'm writing this so that, once you regain consciousness and read this, you'll know that there was always someone hoping for your recovery. Still on that? How much longer are you going to read those short letters?" "I don't think you'll find much," Luke commented. Wednesday didn't look at him and kept studying the letters. "If I want to spend my time on this, what's your problem?" Wednesday asked. "None, just saying. You should be more compassionate when talking to me. I did suffer in PLP," Luke said with a sad expression, sitting on the edge of Wednesday's bed. "Oh, poor thing. Should I give you a candy and a kiss on the forehead every time I see you?" Wednesday asked sarcastically, her tone exaggerated and mocking. "Haha, you're so kind, mocking a freshly recovered patient," Luke said, shaking his head as if he were heartbroken. Wednesday stood up from her chair and walked over to Luke, sitting on his lap and entwining her arms behind his neck. "You don't get tired of using the PLP excuse, do you? You might have had a better chance at credibility if you'd acted like someone injured from the start," Wednesday said, staring into his eyes just inches away from his face. "I have to seize the opportunity to get you to treat me more favorably," Luke said with a faint smile as he leaned closer to Wednesday. "Believe me, you're the person I treat the best," Wednesday whispered, leaning in until their lips met. They began kissing passionately, their tongues intertwining as the fervor between them grew. Wednesday placed her hands on Luke's cheeks, and with her black-painted nails, she started pinching his skin. After a few minutes, they pulled apart. "We can't do this." "It's day," Wednesday said, and from the look on Luke's face, she immediately knew what he was thinking. "Fine," Luke said, not wanting to risk being discovered by the Adams either. "You pinched someone injured pretty hard," he added, feeling a slight sting on his cheeks. He was already used to Wednesday showing her affection in this way, and his pain threshold was high enough to handle it. "Stop complaining. Compared to your previous injuries, this doesn't even amount to 1%, Wednesday replied, wiping a small drop of blood from Luke's cheek with her finger and then licking it off with her tongue. Does she seriously not have any vampire ancestors? Luke thought. Did you need me for something? She asked. Yes, the last Saturday of vacation. I'm going to Ajax's house for his 16th birthday. He's throwing a party. You're invited too. Do you want to come? Luke asked. Wednesday paused, tasting the lingering hint of Luke's blood in her mouth. Fine, I'll go, she replied in her usual monotone, devoid of any emotion. Really? Luke asked, more to himself than to her. Yes, Wednesday said flatly. Luke stared at her for a couple of seconds. He hadn't expected her to agree so quickly, but it was a good thing she was going. It would be fun to attend with her. Enid will be there too, Luke added cautiously. Wednesday's expression didn't change at all. Not even her eyes revealed any flicker of different emotion. And Wednesday asked as if Enid's attendance had nothing to do with her. I was just saying, considering everything that happened between us and the fact that she used to be your roommate, Luke said, looking slightly uncomfortable. Thanks to his improved relationship with Thing, Luke had learned a few things he didn't know before. For starters, Wednesday and Enid did have a closer relationship at one point. Enid even managed to get Wednesday to apologize to Thing last year, which was a big achievement. Wednesday had also shared with Enid the story of her pet scorpion's death, something she didn't share with just anyone. Thing, despite not having a tongue, had a loose one and spilled everything to Luke. He was quite the gossip and chatterbox. Although their relationship hadn't developed to the level of best friends as it had in the series, they also weren't complete strangers, as Luke had thought a few months ago. I don't care, as long as you don't make a promise to her. You'll be safe, Wednesday said in a biting tone. Hearing this, Luke couldn't help but show a guilty expression. It was one of the few matters, or perhaps the only one, that truly affected him and made him feel remorseful. He never intended to hurt Enid, but he had fallen for Wednesday without being able to stop it. It just happened. In addition, it made him look like he was an unfaithful person, and although technically he was, his case is special. He had fallen in love with two people simultaneously, two girls he would give his life for. He wasn't the typical cheater who betrayed his partner. Besides, he and Enid hadn't fully gotten back together at that point. I'm sorry, Wednesday said upon seeing Luke's expression. It was rare to see him look that way, and she understood that the situation he had faced was far from a typical case of infidelity, and honestly, she didn't care much about it. She trusted him and knew he would never be unfaithful to her. The fact that he had risked his life to protect her during the battles against Crackstone and Dolores proved his love for her. It's fine, Luke replied. Just then, Natasha sent him a telepathic message that he found far from pleasant. Come to my room. It's time to test the gender-swapping potion, Chapter 167. Tuesday? What happened? Wednesday asked, noticing Luke's odd expression. Natasha told me to go to her room. Luke replied, not being very specific.
Oh.
The reason? Wednesday asked, unable to suppress a slight smile. There could only be one reason. It was only a few days before they were set to head to Ohio, and the housekeeper still hadn't shown them the gender-switching potions. The gender-switching potion. Luke muttered, his expression anything but happy. It's time, Wednesday thought, getting up from Luke and heading toward the door. And where are you going? Luke asked, also walking toward the exit. To witness your gender change. What else? Wednesday said with a slight mocking smile, which annoyed Luke. Luke tried to think of solutions to stay in Sunnyvale and Shadyside without involving the gender-switching potion, but he couldn't come up with anything. They needed a search for clues in those two towns, and with his fame, he would be recognized instantly. He would have to go undercover 100%, which would make exploration difficult. When Atlas, Sebastian, and the others stayed in Jericho, they did so incognito, hiding in the cult house and moving very little. He had asked Natasha if there was any potion that could simply change his face, similar to Polyjuice potion from Harry Potter, but nothing like that existed. I bet that in my female form, I'll be taller than you, Luke said as he walked out the door and headed toward Natasha's room. Wednesday frowned slightly and kicked the back of Luke's heel with the tip of her shoe.
Ouch.
Luke complained, quickening his pace to avoid further attacks. They entered Natasha's room, where she stood in front of a circular stone table. On top of the table was a small glass next to a glass bottle filled with a purple liquid. The potion needs at least 30 milliliters to work. Those 30 milliliters will give you an hour in your female form, Natasha said, picking up the glass bottle of purple liquid and pouring exactly 30 milliliters into the small glass. You're sure it won't leave me stuck like that forever, right? Luke asked, holding the glass and examining the purple liquid closely. Absolutely. Now drink the potion, and let's see how your body reacts, Natasha said, urging him. After a few seconds, Luke brought the glass to his lips and drank it. Tastes like grape. Luke thought, less disgusted than he had anticipated, as he swallowed the liquid. Within 2 seconds, he began to feel a strange warmth spreading from the center of his chest to his entire body. It was as if a soft electric current coursed through his limbs, vibrating in his bones and muscles. First, he felt a pressure in his torso. His breathing became shorter as his ribcage seemed to shrink, reducing in a harmonious proportion. His broad shoulders began to narrow, becoming softer and less angular. His height began to decrease. He felt his bones compress smoothly and without any pain. His legs grew shorter, as did his torso, but it didn't feel painful. It was more like his body was readjusting itself to a new form. His height stopped at 1.58 meters, which caused Wednesday to frown, as she stood at 1.55 meters. As this happened, he noticed a change in his hands. His fingers began to thin, and his nails grew slightly longer, taking on a more delicate, almost elegant shape. His wrists also narrowed, losing the athletic robustness that had once defined them. Then came a change in his face. He felt slight pulses in his cheekbones. He couldn't see himself in a mirror, but he was certain his face was now more refined and feminine. His jaw rounded, losing its sharpness, while his lips seemed to grow a bit fuller. His eyes, though the same size, now appeared larger due to the slight lowering of his eyebrows, which had taken on a softer curve. His nose also slimmed slightly, completing the transformation. The one change Luke had truly been anticipating happened next. He felt a strange, new weight in his chest. Here it comes, Luke thought, watching as his chest began to expand slowly. His shirt, which had previously fit comfortably, now tightened as his breasts grew. He couldn't help but want to massage them, but he restrained himself, knowing that the two lovely ladies in front of him were watching him intently and would likely think he was a pervert. Finally, he felt a tingling in his scalp. His hair began to grow, falling past his shoulders and down his back. What had always been short hair was now long and wavy. There was one final change he preferred not to think about, near his legs. I guess that's all, Luke said, looking at his delicate hands and surprising himself with his high-pitched, feminine tone of voice. Well, it wasn't so bad after all. I thought it'd be more painful, he added, examining his body, which now had curves, an hourglass shape, and rather prominent breasts. Why aren't you saying anything? He asked, stopping his self-examination and looking at Wednesday and Natasha, who were still silently staring at his face. Natasha, who rarely lost her composure, couldn't help but let her eyes drift over Luke's new appearance, taking in the details. See for yourself, Natasha said, taking a handheld mirror from her dresser and handing it to Luke. Luke took the mirror hesitantly, still feeling the unfamiliar weight of his body and the strands of hair falling over his shoulders. He lifted it in front of his face, and what he saw left him speechless. He instinctively squinted, as if a blinding light was shining out of the mirror. She was too beautiful. His blue eyes were large, luminous, and seemed almost hypnotic. His face was refined, with high cheekbones and a delicate jawline that bore no resemblance to the firmness of his original features. His long, wavy hair had turned a golden color. It was previously a light brown, almost blonde. Is that me? He asked, tilting the mirror slightly from side to side, as if needing to confirm it wasn't a trick of the light. His voice, though still recognizable as his own, had a softer, more melodious tone that unsettled him even further. A very pleasant and lovely voice. He had always been confident in his masculine appearance, but this new feminine look was too perfect to be real. Even supermodels would tremble at the sight of his flawless, beautiful face. "You're a great beauty, miss. I expected you to be attractive in your feminine form, but not this perfectly exaggerated," Natasha said, crossing her arms and leaning against the dresser with a barely contained smile. "I know I'm a beauty, but you look like a living painting created by an artist obsessed with perfection," Natasha added. "Great. Now I'm an impeccable beauty. Just what my ego needed," Luke said with a narcissistic smile as he continued admiring his face in the mirror. "Your ego was already perfectly inflated," Wednesday retorted coldly. Her arms were crossed as well, as if to make it clear she wasn't impressed. "Finally, you speak. So, what do you think of my feminine self?" Luke asked, stepping closer to Wednesday so she could get a better look. "Offensively conventional. It's like someone took a paintbrush and turned you into a character from a saccharine fairy tale. Where's the darkness?" "This isn't you," Wednesday replied, her expression still neutral, but her tone carried a hint of disdain. Just because Luke now looks like an elven queen doesn't mean he's lost his narcissistic, arrogant, and borderline psychopathic essence. "It's a complete package," Natasha said, letting out a brief laugh. "Thanks for the compliment, Natasha," said Luke with a slight grimace, which, to his frustration, only seemed to highlight the perfection of his new face even more. Natasha gave a mocking bow. "Always at your service, my lady. Being this perfect almost feels like a cruel joke. If I saw you on the street, I'd think you were something artificial. And the worst part is that even I can't stop looking at you," Wednesday remarked, scanning Luke from head to toe. "Does that mean you still find me irresistible, even with this elven queen appearance?" Luke asked, his crooked smile only enhancing his flawless features. "Irresistible? Irritating is the right word. You're just as irritating in any form. That doesn't change," Wednesday replied, her dark eyes showing not a hint of admiration. "Thanks, I guess," Luke said, stepping a bit closer to her, hoping to make the most of the moment. But Wednesday wasn't having it. She pushed him away with a sharp gesture, her gaze fixed on him with a mix of disdain and annoyance. "Don't get any ideas," she said, clearly irritated by his proximity. "I don't want you misunderstanding. I like your male self," she added. "Oh, yes, sorry," Luke murmured, scratching his golden hair. Even that small, seemingly casual gesture made his image appear even more perfect, as if he were effortlessly posing. For a moment he forgot he was in a female body. It was obvious that Wednesday, being heterosexual, felt uncomfortable with Luke's proximity in this new form, even though he was still the same person on the inside. It would be the same for him if Wednesday transformed into a man. He wouldn't want to kiss her or get close if she were in that form. "All right, let me take a photo for the fake identity," Natasha said, pulling a professional camera out of a drawer. Luke stood against the wall, and Natasha snapped a couple of pictures. "What name would you like, Miss Perfection?"
Natasha asked.
"I don't know," Luke said with a thoughtful look. "Tuesday," Wednesday answered for him. "That's a good one," Natasha nodded. "Ask me if I agree or not." Luke thought, but he said nothing. Natasha then took a few photos of Wednesday for her fake ID. "And you?"
"What name do you want?" she asked.
"Jenna," Luke answered in her place. "Why Jenna?" Wednesday asked, looking at him. "I don't know. It was the first thing that came to mind," Luke replied, shrugging. "Fine. I'll use that name," Wednesday said. She didn't care much about her fake identity. "All right. I'll be your mother, Lucy Foster. Widow. Your father died in a recent car accident, which prompted us to move to escape our tragic past," Natasha explained. "You'll attend Shadyside High School as twin sisters. We need to investigate the historical sites of the two towns, perhaps in old archives, a local library, city records, or even the school itself. Evidence might even be hidden in the woods between the towns. We just don't know," she added. "Great, a scavenger hunt in a normie school with this flashy skin," Luke said, rolling his eyes. "You never like being the center of attention, and now you will be. Thanks to your perfection, Wednesday said with a faintly mocking smile. Luke spoke with Natasha about Ajax's birthday, and she allowed him to attend. In fact, it was a good idea to go there before heading to Ohio. In Natasha's view, the plan offered a strategic advantage. They were currently in New York, about 900 kilometers from Ohio, and if they departed directly from there, their pursuers would likely find them quickly due to the proximity. However, by going first to Ajax's house in Nevada, about 3,500 kilometers from New York, their pursuers would lose time and have to cover a much greater distance. Their trackers wouldn't be searching within the immediate radius of New York and Ohio. Instead, they would start their search from Nevada and have to traverse a significantly larger area. Luke left Natasha's room and noticed he still had over 30 minutes to spare. He didn't like being in this form, no matter how perfect it was. He preferred being a man. Wednesday returned to her room. It seemed she didn't enjoy being around a princess straight out of a fairy tale either. Damn it. I'm going to train, Luke thought, starting to walk through the dark, narrow hallways of the mansion. Chapter 168. The Power of Beauty. Luke had more than 30 minutes before returning to his male form, so he decided to train. If he went back to his room, he wouldn't be able to control himself and would end up examining the most intimate parts of his body, and he didn't want to become a pervert. Moreover, he might end up falling in love with himself if he stared at his reflection in the mirror for too long. These clothes are way too loose, except in the chest area, Luke thought as he arrived at one of the training rooms in the Adams mansion. To his taste, this room was the best of them all. Spacious, well-lit, and filled with many useful objects for training. It had thousands of kilograms in weights for practicing his telekinesis, sharp weapons, traps to train his reflexes and speed, and much more. Luke noticed someone else using the training room. It was Pugsley, who was holding a sword and fighting against a moving mannequin that countered his attacks. The boy with the dead fish expression wasn't having a good time. He was drenched in sweat and was barely managing to defend himself from the blows of the mannequin, which was forcing him to retreat. Finally, Pugsley couldn't keep up. He managed to block a thrust from the mannequin with his own sword, but the attack was so powerful that it knocked him onto his rear. His guard was completely broken, and he lay defenseless on the floor. "Stop!" shouted Pugsley, and the sharp blade of the mannequin's sword halted just centimeters from his eyes. The bright lights that had illuminated parts of the mannequin's body dimmed and went out completely, leaving it frozen in place. Pugsley sighed in relief and stayed on the floor, catching his breath. Finally, after nearly a minute, he felt a gaze on him that made him turn his head. When he saw a blonde girl with deep blue eyes staring at him, he couldn't help but slightly part his lips, stunned by her beauty. He noticed his heartbeat quicken, far more than it had moments ago during training. The girl had gorgeous, long, golden hair. Her features could only be described as flawless. The only strange thing was her outfit, a simple, loose black hoodie and equally oversized pants of the same color. However, Pugsley didn't care about how people dressed. Could someone this beautiful and perfect exist in the world? That was Pugsley's current thought as he clumsily stood up and moved a little closer to the girl to get a better look, searching for any imperfection. Oh boy, thought Luke, holding back a sigh. He hadn't expected his current appearance to be so controversial. Although, if he'd managed to surprise both Wednesday and Natasha, two heterosexual women and beauties themselves, the impact he'd have on a man would be twice as strong, if not more. "Stop," said Luke, raising his hand. Pugsley immediately halted in his tracks, as though the command were an order he couldn't disobey. Should I knock him out and erase his memories? Luke thought, but quickly dismissed the idea. If Wednesday found out, she wouldn't be happy about him erasing her brother's memories. He should have placed Pugsley in an illusion, altered his senses, so that he would see Luke in his male form. But he hadn't thought to do that, and he'd lost the chance when Pugsley turned his head. Even her voice is perfect, thought Pugsley, feeling a nervous tingle run through his entire body. Who are you?" Pugsley stammered, staring directly into Luke's eyes. Pugsley wanted to lower his gaze, embarrassed, but the urge to keep looking at the perfect face in front of him was stronger than his shame. "I am Galadriel," Luke answered hesitantly, though Pugsley didn't notice the doubt in his voice. "A friend of my parents?" Pugsley asked, still stammering. "No." "Of my sister's?" Pugsley asked. In the past, he would have thought that impossible, but his sister had managed to get a boyfriend she was genuinely in love with. "No." Then what?" Pugsley asked, both confused and nervous. "I'm Luke's sister," Luke replied without changing his expression. There was no way he'd admit to being Luke transformed into a woman. That would make things awkward, and he didn't want to give Pugsley ammunition for jokes at his expense.
"What?"
"He has a sister?" Pugsley asked, his expression one of pure surprise. He hadn't expected that answer at all.
"Yes."
"Do you think I'm a liar?" asked Luke, or rather, Galadriel, frowning. "And no, of course not," Pugsley said immediately, waving his hands around nervously as he felt his cheeks heat up. Galadriel's frown only made her look more beautiful instead of intimidating. That's what Pugsley thought, and it made him blush even more. Luke read Pugsley's thoughts and furrowed his brow even more. With this appearance, it was impossible to look scary. He felt like a perfect princess straight out of a Disney movie. "I'm going to train, so get lost," Luke said with a dismissive wave of his delicate, elegant hand. Pugsley didn't look indignant or angry at being thrown out of his own training room. Please, train fencing with me," Pugsley pleaded, bowing deeply. He didn't want to leave and stop looking at her. 15 minutes. Not a second more. "Then you're out," Luke replied after thinking for a few seconds. He realized that kicking the owner out of the room didn't seem very fair. A sword flew into Luke's right hand on its own. Since he'd be facing a beginner, he decided to give him a slight advantage by using his non-dominant hand. "Thank you," Pugsley said with a smile on his face. Morticia, Gomez, and the rest of the Addams family would have been shocked to see Pugsley smile like that since he usually wore a dead fish expression. The match began. Luke wasn't gentle with Pugsley, though compared to Gomez, he was a far better training partner. At first, Pugsley hesitated to counterattack, as if hurting someone so perfect would be an unforgivable crime and an angel might descend to punish him for it. But Luke wasn't about to let that continue. "Hit harder, you idiots," Luke shouted, thrusting his sword forward with a strike Pugsley managed to block at the last second. The force of the blow sent him stumbling back more than 5 meters. Even so, Luke had held back. He could have easily broken a bone if he'd added more power or aimed to strike his arm instead. He could have also increased the speed to make sure Pugsley couldn't defend himself in time. The comment made Pugsley shudder, and finally, he stopped holding back. His expression grew more serious, as if he realized that disappointing her was the worst offense he could commit. Still, Luke maintained an overwhelming advantage. But now that Pugsley was fighting with full determination, it was at least better, and there was potential for improvement. "Try harder, or I'll break your legs like my brother had to," Luke snapped, frowning as he blocked a strike. Though better aimed, it was still weak. Pugsley flinched, vividly recalling the day Luke had nearly broken his legs. Determined not to disappoint Galadriel, he intensified his efforts. Anything to earn even a shred of her recognition, Pugsley thought, pouring every ounce of his being into this match as though it were the most important test of his life. Luke picked up on the thought and couldn't help feeling a little odd. Why was Pugsley acting like such a simp? Sure, Luke knew his appearance was flawless, but Pugsley's desperation bordered on ridiculous. Yet, a fleeting memory of Fester and Gomez crossed his mind. Both were infamous for their unconditional and passionate devotion. Fester, in the movies, had always been quite the hopeless romantic, a simp in every sense of the word. The fight continued as Luke hurled insults at Pugsley and inflicted minor cuts to make him suffer a bit. Pugsley didn't mind the contrast between Galadriel's flawless appearance and her terrible personality. In fact, he found the contradiction sublime. "Pay attention, you idiots," Luke shouted, trying to be more unbearable than usual. But instead, it seemed to have the opposite effect. Even Luke's angry voice was like music to Pugsley's ears. How could someone be so perfect? Pugsley couldn't tear his eyes away from her face. That irritated expression, framed by her perfect features and ethereal aura, disarmed him more effectively than any blow. Finally, the agreed-upon time came to an end. With a fast motion, Luke disarmed Pugsley in a single, flawless move, sending his sword flying through the air to land with a loud clang. Before Pugsley could react, Luke's sword was pointed at his throat. "Time," Luke declared coldly, not bothering to lower the blade immediately. Pugsley, drenched in sweat and covered in minor cuts, wore a crestfallen expression. He hadn't managed to land even a single hit on Galadriel, which meant he wouldn't earn her approval. "Why the long face?" Luke asked as he sent the sword flying back to its rack. "I couldn't hit you even once. I'm just weak." "My sister's right. I'm pathetic," Pugsley said, staring at the floor with a dejected look. "I think Wednesday went too far," Luke thought, watching Pugsley with a strange expression. Although she always speaks her mind to everyone, perhaps Wednesday went too far, leaving Pugsley with less confidence in himself. And in just a few days, he would be starting at Nevermore. After a few seconds, Luke sighed. "You didn't do too badly," he said, his tone direct but honest. "For a kid your age, your strength and fencing technique are good. And considering you're a psychic, that's pretty impressive." Pugsley looked up, visibly surprised. "Really?" Luke nodded, keeping his expression serious.
"Yes."
"You have an advantage most your age don't. You don't freeze in the face of pain or fear. That's not something you can teach. Growing up in a family like yours, where danger is part of everyday life, has made you strong in ways other kids can't even imagine." Those words, spoken in such a pleasing voice, revitalized Pugsley. "And one more thing. Don't say such pathetic things in front of a girl again. It's embarrassing. You're lucky that I, unlike common mortals, consider everyone equally beneath me," Luke added, his tone dripping with narcissism. Pugsley blinked, confused and slightly mesmerized. Luke smiled inwardly. If he said that in its original form to a girl, she would slap him and never talk to him again. But with this elven goddess appearance, she can get away with no matter how many narcissistic comments she says. "You should aspire to be more like my brother," Luke added, letting a faintly arrogant smile curve his lips. "Like Luke?" Pugsley asked, intrigued. Luke nodded solemnly, as if speaking of a legend. "Yes, my brother. A true role model in many ways. If only you were a little more like him. Maybe you'd stop being so pathetic all the time." "I'll do my best to be like him," Pugsley said with determination. If Galadriel deemed someone worthy, then that was someone worth learning from. "Good," Luke concluded with a lofty gesture. "Now get out. Your 15 minutes are up, and I have more important things to do." Pugsley gave a clumsy bow, thanking her once again before leaving the room. Luke watched as Pugsley's figure disappeared through the door. Slowly, his gaze dropped to his own hand, as if he had just discovered something entirely new and unsettling. The power of feminine beauty. He had always known that in his male form, his appearance was attractive. But male beauty was different. There was a limit to how much it could captivate others, a barrier of respect and distance that kept everything balanced. But in his female form, it was different. In this guise, he wasn't just attractive, he was overwhelming, almost ethereal. There was something about the flawless symmetry of his face, the softness of his skin, the natural grace in every movement that effortlessly captured everyone's attention. Her beauty didn't just draw glances, it had the power to disarm, to subjugate, to inspire devotion. Even Pugsley, an Adams boy accustomed to the macabre and the bizarre, showed devotion just to be near her. Wednesday had also admitted she couldn't stop looking at him, despite not feeling any romantic attraction, and Natasha felt the same way. If these people, so used to the eccentric and the unsettling, reacted like this, what could happen with someone normal? Luke shook off the thought and began training in the large room. Since the last battle on Raven Island, his powers had increased significantly. Death fights and difficult fights were the best way to improve. Chapter 169. Jealous? Greendale. In a more secluded area of the town of Greendale stood a mansion built of grayish stone, with large windows. This was the mansion of the patriarch of the Spellman family. However, only one living member of this branch of the family remained in the mansion, Elliot Spellman. His wife and 2 children had been murdered by Luke Poe with the help of Wednesday and Fester, the latter assisted in killing his wife. Near the Grand Mansion lay a cemetery, its gravestones covered in moss and its angel statues in a state of disrepair. Deeper within the cemetery, 3 newly constructed structures stood. 3 sarcophagi, each bearing inscriptions engraved on wrought iron doors and adorned with ornamental details. The one in the center bore the name Dolores. The one to its right bore the name Ingrid, and the one to its left, Sebastian. Sitting cross-legged on the stone floor and staring at the 3 sarcophagi with an impassive expression was Elliot Spellman. His gaze shifted from his daughter's name to his wife's and then to his son's. Once he completed the sequence, he repeated it in reverse. After repeating this process dozens of times, his gaze dropped to his lap. Specifically, to a book resting there, the demonic Book of Crackstone. The Book of Soiga. Elliot thought, his eyes unwavering. He had finally managed to get his hands on the book he had coveted so much. But at what cost? Elliot hadn't told Edward or the demonic elders who still lived about the demonic book. He had no intention of doing so, as they would undoubtedly take it from him. He had learned the location of the book. His wife and 2 children had died to obtain it. Why would he give the book to Edward? Edward would simply say he wasn't ready to use the Book of Soiga. The servant who brought him the book was loyal to him and his deceased wife, not to the elders who controlled the family from the shadows. Elliot had mentioned the book to Edward in the past, so Edward might have his suspicions. But now he must believe that Luke and Wednesday have it. He likely thinks they handed it over to the Addams family for safekeeping or to give it to the Department of Demon Extermination. Suddenly, a figure silently appeared behind Elliot, as if emerging from the very shadows. It was a middle-aged woman with black hair streaked with gray, dressed in an immaculate black uniform. Her skin was pale. Without looking up, she knelt, placing her right fist firmly on the floor and lowering her head until it almost touched the tiles. "Report," Elliot said, unsurprised by the woman's sudden appearance. "As we anticipated, the middle son of Sthenon Petropoulos will hold his 16th birthday party next Friday. However, on Saturday, he will celebrate again with all his classmates and friends," the servant replied respectfully, her voice soft and measured. "Will Luke Poe attend?" Elliot asked. "Yes, sir. Currently, Luke Poe is traveling in a 2021 Audi e-tron GT with the license plate E57KJ4. Based on his route, his destination is Nevada. He's traveling with his housekeeper, his girlfriend, and Fester Addams. They have over 3,500 kilometers to cover, so they'll arrive by Saturday afternoon," the servant replied.
"Good.
"He's finally leaving the Addams mansion," Elliot murmured to himself. "Shall we intercept them?"
No."
With Fester Addams there, it would turn into a drawn-out battle. "We'll use the special lesser demon to attack on Saturday," Elliot responded, standing up as he calculated his next moves. Time was running out. "The special demon that leads other lesser demons?" the servant asked, and Elliot nodded. "Sir, I know lesser demons aren't weaklings, especially not in groups, but considering Luke Poe's strength, I don't think—" The servant began, but stopped mid-sentence. "I know. The target isn't Luke Poe. It's his companions and friends. Does he think he can attend a party as if nothing happened?" Elliot said coldly. This time, his target wasn't Luke, his target was his surroundings. The aim was to show Luke that he wasn't safe and to burden him with guilt when his companions were injured or killed. Elliot wasn't worried about anyone discovering that the attack had been orchestrated by the Spellmans. He was using demons, an unconventional means, and they couldn't be traced back to him. Their memories couldn't be extracted. This time, it would be impossible for Luke to gather evidence proving that the Spellmans had orchestrated the attack. A luxurious Audi sped down a highway at over 100 kilometers per hour. The person behind the wheel was Luke. In the passenger seat sat Wednesday, reading a book, completely unfazed by the car's high speed. In the back seats were Fester and Natasha. The bald man occasionally glanced at Natasha, who sat with her eyes closed. "Hey, Galadriel. Slow down," Wednesday said without lifting her gaze from her book, her expression blank. Luke resisted the urge to roll his eyes. Being called Galadriel by Wednesday was nothing new. She had started using the nickname after Pugsley told her about Luke's supposed sister, Galadriel. After his first encounter with the elven goddess, Pugsley had asked about her every day. Luke had to resort to using the potion again to keep up the act and fool him. Thankfully, they had left the mansion, so there was no need to waste more potions. "Are you afraid of speed?" "I didn't expect that from you," Luke replied, his tone laced with mockery. "That's not it. You're going 125 kilometers per hour. You'll get us pulled over for speeding, and we'll waste time." "My time is valuable, Galadriel." "I can't say the same for yours," Wednesday replied as she turned the page of her book. "Fine. Your wish is my command," Luke muttered through gritted teeth, easing up on the accelerator. As for crashing, that was impossible, given his reflexes, clairvoyance, telekinesis, and more. He had plenty of ways to avoid an accident. 30 minutes later. "Galadriel, stop at the next gas station. I want to buy a coffee," said Wednesday. Her tone was monotonous, without a hint of mockery or sarcasm. But Luke knew she was mocking him, deep down. "Stop calling me Galadriel," said Luke. Since the trip began, he'd been called Galadriel more than 5 times.
"Why?"
"You chose that name yourself. It's a shame your fake ID says Tuesday instead," Wednesday said, finally putting her book down. Luke had taken the bait, unable to tolerate being called Galadriel any longer. "Does it bother you so much that your brother fell in love with my female form?" "It wasn't my idea. It's his fault. He sees a beautiful girl and instantly falls head over heels," said Luke. "I'm not bothered that my idiotic brother fell in love with the great Galadriel," Wednesday replied, her tone exaggerated and dripping with sarcasm as she said great. "I'm just curious how it will affect him psychologically when he finds out Galadriel doesn't exist and that it's actually you," she added, staring into the distance as if envisioning the future. "We'll tell him Galadriel died horribly in battle against the Spellmans. That'll be my revenge for him trying to kill me with a sniper rifle," Luke said with a vengeful smile. The perfect revenge, a broken heart and deep sorrow. Since he couldn't break Pugsley's legs, he had to find another way to exact his vengeance. That would affect him too. Maybe even worse. "Doesn't matter to me," said Wednesday with a shrug. "Sometimes I question if she even cares about her brother," thought Luke, his expression puzzled. "If it doesn't bother you about your brother, then stop calling me Galadriel," said Luke. "I don't want to," Wednesday replied in a flat tone. "What's wrong with hers?" Luke thought, bewildered. Ever since he transformed into his female version, Wednesday had been acting strange. Could she be attracted to my female self? Luke pondered for a moment, incredulous. He shook his head almost immediately.
"No."
"Impossible." He recalled how Wednesday looked at his female form, with rejection and disdain. "She's irritated," said a familiar voice in his mind. It was Natasha, who had chosen to communicate telepathically to avoid interfering directly with the scene.
"What?"
Luke replied, slightly startled by the sudden message. "Irritated by what?" he added.
"By you."
"Your female version is too perfect," Natasha responded. "Is that bad?" Luke asked, confused. "Luke, even I felt a hit to my ego seeing you like that. Honestly, I've never felt less impressive in comparison to someone. And Wednesday, from the little I've seen of her, her ego and narcissism are incredibly high. I'd even say higher than yours. Seeing your female version so flawless in appearance must have made her feel insecure and jealous, probably," Natasha explained. "Jealous of my female version? How could? Does she think I'd fall in love with myself or something?" Luke thought. He had looked at himself in the mirror countless times in his female form, but he hadn't fallen in love with himself. His ego wasn't that inflated, or rather, it wasn't stupid enough for that. "Hey," Luke said, sending a telepathic message to Wednesday, who was slightly surprised by his sudden use of telepathy, though her face showed no reaction.
"What?"
Wednesday asked. "I remember you telling me that my female form is a cruel joke for being so perfect that it was offensively conventional," Luke said. "So what?" she replied. "Then, if my female form is a cruel joke, does that mean you are too? Because to me, you're just as perfect as she is." "No, you're more perfect," Luke responded sincerely, recalling the moment he saw Wednesday sleeping upright in the infirmary with such elegance and poise. To him, that was perfection. Wednesday looked at him in silence, processing what he had just said. Luke's comment had caught her off guard, and for a moment, she didn't know how to respond. She felt a faint blush rise to her cheeks, though Luke didn't notice since he was focused on the road. He was deliberately avoiding eye contact with her after making such an embarrassing remark. Fine, you're right. I am more perfect. Not that it really matters to me, but thanks, Wednesday said. I don't say things just to be polite. You know I only speak what I truly think, Luke replied calmly, but inwardly satisfied with her response. It wasn't every day that he got Wednesday to say thank you. The journey continued, with Wednesday no longer calling Luke Galadriel. Luke thanked Natasha. If it hadn't been for her, he never would have realized that Wednesday had been irritated and jealous of his female version. Chapter 170. Patroclus Manor. 50 kilometers before reaching Ajax's house, Fester had to part ways with the group. He quickly said goodbye to everyone, somewhat reluctant to separate from his dear niece and from Natasha. He believed his relationship had improved with the beautiful redhead, but business was business. He needed to take care of some unfinished business and then fully involve himself in the exciting war that was brewing. Remember, Wednesday, I taught you everything about how to go unnoticed. Once you have that evidence, the real fun will begin, Fester said with a smile. I know, Wednesday replied flatly. And Natasha, I hope we see each other soon, Fester stammered, looking at Natasha. Whatever, Natasha said, nodding slightly with a serious expression. For some reason, Fester grinned foolishly, satisfied with such a reaction. Previously, Natasha would only respond with a nod, not even saying a word. Luke, Fester said, now looking at Luke with his sunken eyes. Fester, Luke replied, meeting his gaze. The bald man had saved Luke's life, and for that, Luke was very grateful. Still, dealing with him was very, very difficult. Like most Adams, but twice as hard. I'd appreciate seeing Galadriel one last time, Fester said after a few seconds. Luke's expression shifted to one of disgust. Gross, dude, he said, taking a step back. Leave, Wednesday said coldly, giving Fester a hard kick in the rear. He let out a horrible laugh and sped off. And here I thought I would have an emotional farewell, Luke said with a faint smile as he climbed back into the car. They resumed their journey, and with the speed at which Luke was driving, it didn't take long to reach the Patroclus mansion. The mansion was surrounded by tall, dark trees. A large double door made of dark wood, decorated with snake carvings, was the only visible entrance. Luke stopped the car right in front of the massive double doors, which, after a few seconds, opened on their own with a low, deep creak, granting them passage. The Audi moved forward along a stone pathway. In the distance, a mansion came into view, an imposing gray stone structure with black marble details crowned by pointed rooftops. Statues of human figures flanked the path. I hope they're criminals, Luke commented with a lazy expression as he observed his friend's home. Sometimes your morality surprises me, Wednesday replied in a neutral tone, though her lips curved slightly. Luke raised an eyebrow.
Why?
I've never killed an innocent person. Only those who deserved it. I was even a famous vigilante for a few days, he said. Yeah, whatever you say, Wednesday replied, not in the mood to start a conversation that would go nowhere. Ajax's father mentioned a statue garden, Luke said. I wonder what it's like. I hope they have more variety. These are a bit repetitive. Terror and despair are fine, but I'd like to see some creativity. Surprise, agony. Maybe even resignation, Wednesday said, tilting her head slightly. Always so demanding, Luke said. I just have standards, Wednesday replied as she observed a statue of what seemed to be a girl her age, her mouth open and her face frozen in terror. The car moved forward to a small roundabout situated in front of the mansion's main entrance. At its center stood an elegant fountain, dominating the space. Well, here we are, Luke remarked, turning off the engine and glancing at the line of people who seemed to be waiting for them. It was 6 p.m. The party wouldn't start until nighttime, so it was clear they were the first to arrive. Among the group, Luke recognized Ajax, his two brothers, and their father. There were also 3 women in elegant dresses, and lastly, a few others dressed similarly, who were likely servants. The 3 of them stepped out of the car and greeted everyone. "Happy birthday, man," Luke said, giving Ajax a firm handshake. Ajax grinned before they shared a friendly hug, complete with hearty pats on the back. "I never thought I'd live to see the day you'd say that to me in person," Ajax replied with a wide smile, happy to see his friend. "Hey, I wished you a happy birthday last year too," Luke said. Ajax raised an eyebrow, his smile growing as he crossed his arms.
Yeah, right.
Via text, and with the detailed, heartfelt message, HP. "I assume that was meant to stand for happy birthday." Luke chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "This year, I came in person. That should earn me some points." Ajax introduced Luke to his mother and stepmothers. 3 wives. Seeing is believing, Luke thought to himself. Luke also introduced Wednesday, who maintained her usual blank and emotionless expression. Natasha, after greeting everyone, took the Audi to the private parking lot used by the Patroclus family, guided by one of the numerous servants. Luke, before Sthenon and Ajax's brothers could speak to Luke, Ajax interrupted them. "Wait, everyone. What did you bring me as a gift?" "I'm curious," Ajax said, knowing his family was eager to bombard Luke with questions about the Blood Moon incident.
Oh, right.
"A great gift," Luke said, suddenly remembering and glancing at Wednesday. Wednesday was wearing a small black backpack. Seeing Luke's look, she took it off her back, opened it, and handed a gift-wrapped object to Luke. Ajax eagerly took the gift and quickly unwrapped it, excited to see what it was. His brothers and the rest of the family watched from the side. "The Shining?" Ajax asked, looking at the cover of a hardcover book. "Yes, the next book in Luke's career," shouted Isidro, Ajax's younger brother, his eyes shining with excitement. As a fan of Luke's, he knew that just a few days ago, it had been announced that Luke's 3rd book would be released in about 10 days. "Exactly," Luke said with a satisfied smile. He liked Ajax's younger brother, much more than Pugsley. "The first edition, and a special, unique edition that only you'll have. In the future, it'll be incredibly valuable," he added. "Awesome," exclaimed Isidro. "Back off, it's my gift," Ajax said, placing his hand on his brother's face and pushing him away. Ajax was thrilled with the gift. While it might seem a bit narcissistic of Luke to give his own upcoming book as a present, Ajax didn't see it that way. His family was wealthy, and this gift felt far more meaningful. "Here," Wednesday said, pulling a small glass jar out of her backpack and handing it to Ajax, who took it with a puzzled expression. Inside the jar was a tongue floating in a clear, thick liquid. "A tongue?" Ajax asked, staring at the jar with a mix of discomfort and confusion. The others around him shared similar expressions, but Wednesday seemed utterly unfazed. "Yes, a tongue," Wednesday replied in her usual neutral tone, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. "Whose tongue is it, if I may ask?" Ajax inquired, seeking some form of explanation. "It's better not to know," Luke interjected quickly. "Well, it's definitely unique." "Thanks, I guess," Ajax said with an awkward laugh.
Don't guess.
"It's a gift." "Say thank you and move on," Wednesday retorted. "Thank you," Ajax said obediently. It was incredibly difficult to communicate with or understand this Adams girl. He couldn't fathom how Luke managed to date her, or how they seemed to get along so well, considering they had lived in the same house throughout the holidays. After that, they were invited to enter the mansion. There were still a couple of hours before the party would begin, and the other guests would start arriving. Ajax went to make preparations, as he would be using the mansion's right wing. Meanwhile, Luke and Wednesday were invited to have tea with Sthenon, his wives, and his children. The conversation was pleasant and, fortunately for Luke and Wednesday, who weren't the most sociable people, it didn't last too long. It was mostly a courtesy, as the family was eager to hear directly from them about what happened on the night of the lunar eclipse. Chapter 171. Party Eye, excited for the party? Luke asked, standing in a luxurious and spacious room along with Wednesday. Ajax had brought Luke and Wednesday to a large bedroom so they could hang out there. He was in charge of preparing everything for the party that would start in a few hours. He knew that Luke and Wednesday preferred having a room to themselves rather than socializing with his family. He also told them they could explore the mansion, except for the right wing, where he was setting everything up and wanted it to be a surprise. As for Natasha, she was taken to another room. She didn't want to be at a party full of teenagers and was only staying in the mansion for the night. Wednesday, who was sitting on a luxurious sofa with her hands resting softly on her lap and looking at the floor, raised her gaze at Luke's question. "Do you really think I'd be excited about a party?" Wednesday replied, turning the question back on him. "No, but you agreed to come. I thought maybe you'd come with a slightly less demanding mindset and relax a little," Luke said as he sat down next to Wednesday. "I came because the best thing for the mission is to get away from New York, which is close to Ohio," Wednesday replied curtly. "You're very antisocial today," Luke said, and Wednesday turned her head robotically to look at him, prompting Luke to shift a few spots away as a precaution. For most of the trip, she had only spoken to tease him by calling him Galadriel. Now, she barely spoke, and when she did, her tone was curt and impatient. To most people, this would seem normal for Wednesday, but not to Luke because she wasn't like this with him. "Fine, I'll be more social if that's what you want. Are you excited for this grand party?" Wednesday asked in a neutral tone, devoid of any emotion. "Considering you hate popular music, hate dancing, hate alcohol, and hate socializing," she added. Luke furrowed his eyebrows. This is what Wednesday considers being more sociable. Although she was right about what she said, he hated all those things. He had only tried alcohol once in that rundown bar, and he absolutely hated it. The hangover was awful, and the taste of alcohol was just as bad. The only good thing about it, if it could even be called that, was the effect it had. It made you a bit happier than usual and more talkative. "You should try alcohol for the first time. I'd like to see you drunk," Luke said with a faint smile. It would be hilarious to see Wednesday in that state. Maybe she'd be super talkative, even loud, or make bad jokes. Who knows? "I won't drink alcohol, and neither will you. We're not in the Addams mansion anymore. The Spellmans could attack us. We have to stay alert at all times, understand?" Wednesday said, staring intently at Luke. What a buzzkill, Luke thought. We're in the Patroclus mansion. Besides, there will be many students from important outcast families. "I doubt they'd dare attack us," Luke replied. "We don't know that. We have to stay vigilant and not let our guard down. We can't be caught off guard like we were with Dolores," Wednesday countered. "Oh, great. This is going to be such a fun night," Luke said with clear sarcasm. At this rate, the two of them would end up sitting in a corner, watching everyone else have fun at the party. Wednesday didn't respond and turned her gaze forward, saying nothing more. Luke stared at her, waiting for a reply that never came. She doesn't seem to be in the best mood today, Luke thought. The room fell silent. Luke pondered what to do. He couldn't go meet Ajax, as he was busy preparing everything for the party and wanted it to be a surprise. And he couldn't talk to Wednesday either. She seemed to be in a bad mood for some unknown reason. Luke had thought that after their earlier conversation about Galadriel, things had smoothed over, but apparently they hadn't. He could explore the mansion, avoiding the right wing, but he didn't want to. During his exploration, he might run into Ajax's siblings or some other relative, and he wasn't in the mood to socialize. Wednesday was right when she said he hated socializing. That left him with only one option: killing time on his phone. While Luke played video games on his phone, Wednesday pulled a book out of her backpack and began reading it. The only sound in the room was the noise of the video game coming from Luke's phone speakers. It didn't bother Wednesday, she was used to it. Finally, to Luke's relief, Ajax appeared in the room, proudly announcing with a smile that everything was ready. Without wasting time, he led them through the mansion's hallways to the rooms where the party would be held. They would be the first to witness the fruit of his labor. The first space was a foyer transformed into an elegant welcome area. The walls, usually adorned with sober landscape paintings, were now draped with dark curtains. A solid wooden table occupied the center, topped with a mountain of glasses and bottles of alcohol. Lots of alcohol, arranged with almost ceremonial precision. The dim lighting and the soft murmur of background music gave the place an intimate atmosphere. Welcome to the pre-party lounge. Once everyone arrives, we'll move to the main hall, where the real magic happens, Ajax explained, spreading his arms as if presenting a masterpiece. Luke observed with curiosity, while Wednesday, wearing her typical unperturbed expression, scanned the room with her gaze, seemingly approving of the dark aesthetic. "Are your parents okay with you having this much alcohol?" Luke asked, walking over to one of the tables and grabbing one of the many bottles. The bottle he picked up was whiskey, Johnny Walker Blue Label, with an alcohol content of 55.8%. "Yes, they know. It'd be impossible to hide this much alcohol," Ajax replied casually. Luke looked at him with a mix of disbelief and confusion. What the hell was wrong with Outcast parents? Did they actually want their son and his friends to end up in an alcohol-induced coma? "This is just the pre-party? Are you trying to give someone a stroke?" Luke asked, putting the bottle back. Either way, he couldn't drink tonight. Wednesday had forbidden it. Outcasts are more resistant to alcohol than normies. "We don't die that easily," Ajax said with a confident smile. Luke raised an eyebrow. Clearly, Ajax had never been truly drunk before. Unlike him, who had once, after several glasses of whiskey and vodka, ended up with a massive hangover. He wasn't immune, even if his body could handle more than a normie's. It would be interesting to see if they're really that resistant. "I've never witnessed anyone have a stroke from alcohol poisoning. It could be educational," Wednesday said, eyeing the bottles of alcohol. Ajax burst out laughing. "Don't worry, no one's ending up in an alcohol-induced coma. At least not tonight." "A shame," Wednesday said. Fortunately, Ajax didn't hear her. "How many people did you invite?" Luke asked, curious. Our entire grade is over 100 people. I also invited friends from other grades and some who don't go to Nevermore. There'll be a lot of us," Ajax said with a smile. "Oh," Luke muttered, not very enthusiastic. He wasn't a fan of crowds. "Excited to see your arch-rival again?" Luke asked, shifting his attention to Wednesday, who raised an eyebrow in confusion. "My what?" "Bianca," Luke replied with a slight smile, knowing the name alone would spark a particular glint in Wednesday's eyes. And it did. The mention of Bianca brought a flash to her gaze, but it wasn't one of nervousness. It was one of cold satisfaction. "Oh, the queen bee," she said with a touch of sarcasm. "Her presence doesn't matter to me. I already taught her a lesson, a siren defeated by a psychic in a fencing tournament where I couldn't use my aura, and she still had her physical advantages," she added with a disdainful smile. Had she used her black aura, she would have ripped Bianca's eyes out without much effort. The fight would have been entirely one-sided. "Wow, you're still savoring that victory, huh?" Luke said. "It's not a minor accomplishment, though it's not a big deal either. It's not every day that a creature with stronger bones and obvious physical advantages learns that the mind always trumps muscle," Wednesday replied. "And what if she decides to ask for a rematch tonight?" Luke asked, curious about her response. "I'll give it to her. She'll be humiliated again." "Some people need continuous lessons to understand their place," Wednesday replied. "A fencing duel would be a great show for the party, even better if you're both under the influence of alcohol," Ajax said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "It would definitely make the party more legendary. Do you want Bianca to die in your house?" Luke thought but kept it to himself. As the three talked, guests began to arrive, guided into the room by the staff. Ajax went to greet everyone as the host and to receive the gifts his friends and classmates brought. Luke and Wednesday stayed near the table, observing the arrivals, who also cast glances their way. To the guests, the strange and psychopathic couple was legendary at Nevermore. They had resurrected and killed Crackstone, the nemesis of America's outcasts. Luke's brow furrowed slightly when he saw Xavier arrive. Not because he disliked seeing his best friend, but because of the people accompanying him. Bianca, followed by Divina, her brother Kent, Yoko, and Enid. Luke began to feel a bit nervous at the sight of Enid. It was far from ideal to have both his ex and his current girlfriend in the same room. The real issue was that he had been in love with Enid. If it were Gia walking in, he wouldn't have cared. He'd never had strong feelings for her. Chapter 172. Party 2. Wednesday looked at Bianca, and most of all at Enid. However, Enid didn't look at her. She glanced briefly at Luke. Luke couldn't help but recall the words Enid had said to him that day. They weren't pleasant, though he didn't blame her. What worried him most was the possibility of having to fight her, as she had seemed on the verge of seriously attacking him that time. Nothing happened at the Nevermore dance, and now months have passed since then. She must have gotten over it, Luke thought. At the Raven in Nevermore, Luke had seen Enid wearing a pink wig and a white dress with pink hues. If she hadn't attacked him then, even after seeing him dance with Wednesday, and despite knowing he'd always said he hated dancing, nothing serious should happen tonight. Xavier approached Luke alongside Bianca. Yoko stayed with Enid, Divina, and Kent, chatting. "It's been a while, bro." Xavier greeted Luke enthusiastically, shaking his hand firmly. "Looks like you've hit that growth spurt you were waiting for," Luke remarked with a slight smile. He noticed Xavier was a bit taller than the last time he'd seen him at Nevermore. "Yeah, we're the same height now," Xavier said with a smile. "It's not a competition, but I've grown a few centimeters too, so I should still be a little taller," Luke said, straightening his posture and just barely edging out Xavier. I don't think so. Must be your shoes," Xavier replied, straightening the back. Ahem. Bianca cleared her throat, giving Xavier a light nudge in the back, which made him stop comparing his height with Luke. "Bianca," Luke said, looking at her and giving a slight nod of his head. "Luke," Bianca replied, returning the greeting in the exact same manner. She then turned her gaze toward Wednesday, who was also looking at her. "I wasn't expecting to see you here, Wednesday," Bianca said in a serious tone, staring intently at Wednesday, who held her gaze just as firmly. "Oh, and why is that, Queen Bee?" Wednesday asked in a completely neutral tone, though the sarcasm in the nickname Queen Bee was crystal clear to Bianca. "I just couldn't picture you at a party. Do you actually enjoy fun and normal things? I thought your code of existence was to avoid anything even remotely pleasant," Bianca said with a smile that was anything but friendly. "You're right. Unlike you, I don't enjoy the sparkle of lights and the echo of hollow laughter. I suppose those are essential for you. After all, you must maintain your illustrious position as leader of the flock," Wednesday said, her tone icy. "Oh boy," Luke thought, exchanging a glance with Xavier. Their girlfriends were absolutely incompatible. It was impossible to imagine them ever becoming friends. They could never double date. Those dates would end in deadly battles that they would have to step in to stop. "At least I don't hide behind a facade of nihilism to justify my inability to enjoy life," Bianca retorted softly, though her eyes burned with intensity as she glared at Wednesday. "Look, Bianca. There's Chris and Emma. Let's go say hi," Xavier interjected, taking Bianca's hand. He quickly led her away, exchanging a knowing glance with Luke, who gave him a slight nod in return. "Always so diplomatic," Luke remarked. "Mediocrity deserves an adequate response, at least once in a while," Wednesday replied. Luke and Wednesday remained in a corner, conversing as they critically observed the guests, who were beginning to drink alcohol. No one dared approach them to make conversation, mostly because of Wednesday. Luke's image had improved slightly in terms of sociability, but Wednesday was intimidating to most people. "Who knows? You might witness someone having a stroke from drinking too much," Luke commented. "Let's hope so," Wednesday replied in a low, monotone voice, tinged with a hint of anticipation. She then turned her attention to a particularly loud group in a room, her lips curling slightly into what might be considered a macabre smile. "Werewolves can get violent quickly when they drink. It'll be interesting to see if any of them lose control and start fighting. That could turn this dull gathering into something worth watching," she added. "Ajax would approve if it makes his party more legendary," Luke said, eyeing a bottle of champagne. He had never drunk champagne before. "Don't even think about it," Wednesday said, following Luke's gaze. "It's only 12% alcohol." "No," Wednesday interrupted. "Are you my mom or something?" Luke muttered irritably, looking away from the bottle. "Would you like me to be your mom?" "Strange fetish you've got there," Wednesday said mockingly. "Don't twist my words," Luke replied, his brow furrowing slightly. Wednesday tilted her head slightly, her dark eyes fixed on Luke as a small, crooked smile spread across her lips, a smile that barely reached her eyes. "It's unusual for a comment to bother you," she said in a low voice, stepping closer to him. She calmly placed her hands around his neck, moving close enough that their faces were dangerously near. Luke froze, blinking in surprise at the unexpected gesture. This wasn't like her, especially not in such a public setting. She had seemed irritable all day, and now she was displaying a public show of affection. Something was off, and he couldn't figure out what. Several guests stopped talking and turned to look at them. Bianca, Enid, and Xavier were among those watching. Just as Wednesday leaned in a bit closer to Luke, narrowing the distance between them with an evident intent, Ajax cleared his throat from the center of the room. "All right, everyone. Time to move to the main hall. The real party starts now," Ajax announced enthusiastically, completely oblivious to the tension that had filled the air around Luke, Wednesday, and the handful of people watching them. After that, Ajax opened a large set of double doors and led everyone into the main hall. Wednesday clicked her tongue in obvious annoyance as she pulled away from Luke. "How inconvenient," she muttered to herself. "What the hell was that?" Luke whispered, still trying to process what had just happened. Wednesday ignored his question, turning gracefully to follow the others as they began to head into the main hall. Luke followed Wednesday, dropping his questions as he was left stunned upon crossing the threshold and seeing the main hall Ajax had prepared. The walls were covered in dark wood panels, contrasting with a black marble floor veined with gold, polished to a mirror-like shine. At the far ends of the hall, large windows with heavy black velvet curtains offered a view of the forest surrounding the mansion. A dance floor occupied a prominent corner of the hall, its glass tiles glowing with lights that pulsed to the rhythm of the music. On an elevated platform, a DJ was already playing. To one side, there was a small bar manned by one of the mansion's staff. Opposite the dance floor was a quieter area, with black leather sofas arranged in a U-shape around low tables. What caught Luke's attention most was a large circle marked on the floor in red lines in the back corner of the hall. Inside the circle, the floor was smooth stone. "Is that a dueling area?" Luke asked. "Looks like it," Wednesday replied, equally surprised by this unexpected feature. Perhaps the party would be more entertaining than she initially thought. Chapter 173, Party 3. "Time to have fun," exclaimed Ajax, and the whole group of people began to disperse, occupying the grand hall. Some headed to the dance floor with their partners, while others went to the lounge area to chat and drink alcohol. Luke and Wednesday also made their way to that area, but not to drink. They sat on a couch in the corner, away from everyone, to have a quiet conversation. "Why are you looking at the dance floor? Have you suddenly developed a love for dancing after being captivated by my performance?" Wednesday asked, noticing Luke's gaze fixed on the ornate dance floor. "Bragging about yourself? That's new," Luke said, eyeing Wednesday with curiosity. Today, she was behaving rather oddly. "I learned it from you. You should feel proud," Wednesday replied. "Very proud. I was looking at the dance floor, wondering how everyone would react to the perfection of Galadriel if she were to appear at the party," Luke said with a faint smile. It was now his turn to tease Wednesday, who had been mocking him since the start of the day. Wednesday frowned slightly. Luke had struck a nerve, as she would put it. "Do you want to wear a dress? It seems like drinking that potion is draining your testosterone," Wednesday retorted, going on the offensive. This time, it was Luke's turn to frown, clearly displeased with the jab at his masculinity. "2 nights ago, you seemed satisfied with my testosterone levels," Luke countered, locking eyes with Wednesday, who returned his gaze unflinchingly. Wednesday recalled what had happened 2 nights ago. They had slept together, and Luke dominated that time, as hard as it was for her to admit. A minor slip had caused her to let out some enticing moans, a rare occurrence for someone like her who always had perfect control over her body. "One victory, and you think you've won the war. How naive," Wednesday replied with a disdainful smile. "It's not the only vict." Before Luke could finish his strange argument, someone interrupted him. "What war are you talking about?" asked a boy with curly black hair, brown eyes, black glasses, and braces. It was Eugene Ottinger, Wednesday's self-proclaimed little brother and her only friend, though she'd never admit it. Luke and Wednesday turned their heads to look at him. How were they supposed to answer his question? They couldn't exactly tell him they were using the term war to refer to their sex life. "It's none of your business, Eugene," Wednesday finally replied. "I'm surprised you'd attend such an irrelevant party," she added. She knew her only friend at Nevermore well enough to conclude he wasn't the type to attend parties. "I don't know. Since I was invited, I thought it would be rude not to come," Eugene replied, scratching the back of his neck awkwardly, unsure of what else to say. He certainly wouldn't admit he came to try and make friends, considering Wednesday was his only friend at Nevermore. Wednesday nodded slightly, not particularly interested in Eugene's reasons for being at the party. The three of them fell silent, Luke and Wednesday sitting, while Eugene stood there looking at them. "Can I sit down?" Eugene asked after a few seconds. "Sure," Luke replied, filling the silence left by Wednesday, who hadn't bothered to respond to her only friend. Eugene sat down next to Luke, sensing that Wednesday wasn't in the best mood and deciding it was best not to invade her personal space. "How were your holidays?" Luke asked after a few moments of silence. He had never tried to befriend Eugene, not out of rejection but simply because the opportunity hadn't arisen. He figured he might as well try now. If Eugene was friends with Wednesday, it shouldn't be impossible to become friends with him too. Eugene started answering a bit timidly, but gradually began to lose his shyness. His enthusiasm grew as he talked about his vacation and all the time he'd spent on beekeeping. He told Luke everything about beekeeping and shared his experiences working with bees. "I only asked to make some small talk, not to hear a detailed account of your entire vacation," Luke thought, unable to believe it. He wasn't sure what was worse, engaging in a sharp and biting argument with Wednesday or listening to Eugene drone on about beekeeping. Fortunately, Ajax came to his rescue. "Hey Luke, come play truth or dare." Without hesitation, Luke got up. He noticed a group of about 20 people sitting in a sort of circle on the central couches, not far from where they were. "I'm coming. Do you want to play?" Luke asked, looking at Wednesday and Eugene. Eugene stood up nervously, nodding repeatedly. Finally, he would have a chance to socialize with his classmates, especially with some of the girls, as he was desperately hoping to find a girlfriend. He had never considered Wednesday a romantic interest. He knew it was impossible, even before she started dating Luke. Wednesday glanced disdainfully at the teenagers sitting in a circle with cups of alcohol, laughing loudly. At first, she was ready to decline immediately, but when she noticed Enid sitting among them, she stood up slowly. "Are you seriously going to play?" Luke asked, a bit surprised, and Wednesday only gave a slight nod. The three followed Ajax and sat on one of the free couches.
Wait.
"To play, you need to take a shot of tequila, rum, or whiskey. Your choice," Bianca said with a faint smile, looking at Wednesday. "Rules are rules," Ajax added, and everyone else nodded in agreement. This wasn't your average game of truth or dare, it was truth or dare with alcohol. With no other option, Luke, Wednesday, and Eugene each took a shot of vodka under the watchful gaze of the group. "I thought we weren't allowed to drink," Luke said to Wednesday through their telepathic bond. "You heard your friend. Rules are rules." "I won't lose to that idiot Bianca," Wednesday replied, her expression unchanged, but Luke could tell her competitive streak had kicked in. "Remember, if you don't complete the dare or answer the truth, you'll have to take a shot. Let the game begin," Ajax announced. As the birthday boy, he was the first to be targeted. One of Ajax's Gorgon friends asked if it was true that he had a fling with a girl named Sarah, who was currently sitting in the circle. After hesitating for a few seconds, Ajax admitted it was true and had to provide some details. Unlike normie games, simply saying something was true wasn't enough here. You had to give details to prove the truth and avoid being accused of lying. As Ajax spilled the gossip, adding some juicy specifics, the group started whistling and shouting in a way Wednesday found utterly stupid. She briefly considered conjuring her scythe and decapitating them all. The game continued clockwise around the circle. There were a few dares that were at least somewhat interesting for Luke and Wednesday to watch. One involved a werewolf daring his fellow packmate to withstand a slap from him. The friend accepted, and a powerful slap landed on his right cheek, knocking out a tooth, drawing blood, and leaving a vivid handprint on his face. The other truths and dares were the usual fare for hormonally charged teenagers, so neither Luke nor Wednesday was particularly entertained by the game. Finally, it was Eugene's turn. He sat nervously next to Luke, clearly anxious about what would come his way. A girl whose name Luke didn't know asked, "Truth or dares?" Eugene thought as fast as he could and decided to choose dare. It would be too embarrassing if he had to reveal a truth that made everyone laugh at him. He could always refuse and take a shot instead, but in this group, everyone either answered or completed the dare. Refusing would make you look like a coward. "Eat one of your boogers," the girl said with a giggle at the end. Her friends sitting next to her laughed along at the disgusting dare. Eugene froze, debating whether he should go through with it or not. Eating a booger in front of everyone would be humiliating, but refusing would make him the only one in the circle who didn't fulfill a truth or dare. "Can't handle something so simple," the girl added with a disdainful smile. Under the weight of her provocation and everyone's eyes on him, Eugene decided to go through with the dare. When he swallowed the booger, most of the students in the circle burst out laughing. "Gross," said the girl who had dared him. "Did he really do it?" "Pathetic." Luke and Wednesday didn't join in the laughter. Their expressions remained as stoic as ever, showing no hint of fun. Luke glanced at Ajax and Xavier, who weren't laughing either, and instead had their brows furrowed. He realized he had chosen his two only friends well. Enid, Yoko, Divina, Kent, and even Bianca weren't laughing. Luke was surprised by the last one. He had judged her a bit harshly. Although her expression didn't show anger like Xavier, Enid, or Ajax, she also didn't seem amused by the situation. "Next turn," Ajax said loudly, cutting through the laughter and directing attention away from Eugene, who was staring at the floor in embarrassment. Though Ajax appeared annoyed, it wasn't his tone that ended the laughter. It was the fact that the next participant was Luke, and everyone in the room was eager to see what he would choose. Truth or dare? "I'll do it," exclaimed a tall, pale boy, raising his hand enthusiastically. His eyes sparkled with a mix of excitement and mischief as he leaned forward, eager to be the one to ask Luke. It seemed he was relishing the chance to take the spotlight. "All right, Mark gets to ask," Ajax said, nodding as no one opposed the choice. If more than one person wanted to ask, they would have to agree or settle it with a simple game of rock, paper, scissors. "Truth or dare? Great writer Poe?" Mark asked with a grin that revealed his sharp teeth. Chapter 174, Party 4. "A vampire," thought Luke with a lazy expression, eyeing the sharp fangs of the boy named Mark. "Dare," Luke replied without much thought. "Oh, bold. Let's see what it could be," said Mark with a grin, resting a hand on his chin, thinking about a challenge that would be both fun and difficult for someone like Luke. "I've got it. Repeat the dance you did at the rave-in in front of everyone," Mark said with a mocking smile forming on his face, while everyone in the circle cheered, some laughing and others whispering in anticipation. "No," Luke replied instantly, his expression hardly changing. "Really? Are you going to back down, big writers?" Mark asked with a grin, his fangs showing once again as others began to laugh. "Too embarrassed?" "Backing out of a simple dare," added a werewolf sitting next to Mark, arms crossed, wearing a smirk. Some exchanged knowing looks, and one even murmured something like "coward," just loud enough for Luke to hear. A few psychic peers or doormates of Luke frowned at Mark and the others mocking him. They wanted to defend Luke, but knew it would backfire. After all, if he could kill Crackstone, he didn't need anyone standing up for him. Luke showed no reaction, just a slow raise of his eyebrow. He had to admit he was a little surprised they had the guts to try mocking him, given his reputation, killing Crackstone, Atlas, a Gorgon over 100 years old, and in the past he had wiped the floor with several older students. He supposed being in a group and at a party gave everyone more courage than usual. Even so, he had no intention of giving in to irrelevant provocations, despite his strong, sometimes vengeful and slightly violent personality. Luke slowly raised his hand, pointing toward a table in the center that held bottles of alcohol and glasses. For a brief moment, a flicker of alarm crossed Mark's face and that of a few others. Their bodies tensed nervously, but they sighed in relief when a bottle and a small glass floated toward Luke. He calmly unscrewed the cap, poured the shot glass until it was full, and drank it. "Done," said Luke, as he returned the bottle and glass to the small circular table in the center. "Wow, how brave," Mark commented sarcastically, though his smile tightened upon realizing his taunt had no effect on Luke. The rumors said he was impulsive, unable to control himself, but that doesn't seem to be the case, thought Mark, a bit confused. "Really? That's the best you've got to try and provoke him?" Wednesday asked, glancing up from inspecting her nails as if the conversation were a waste of her time. "I thought outcasts would have more creativity than normies, but no. It seems even vampires suffer from mediocrity, Mark," Wednesday added, locking eyes with him without blinking. The previous laughter and murmurs ceased, and the atmosphere hung in tense silence. The psychics internally nodded at Wednesday's remark. Someone had to put this stupid vampire in his place. Mark frowned but said nothing. Some in the group looked away, uncomfortable. Wednesday's expression and tone were more intimidating than Luke's lazy demeanor, who seemed entirely unfazed by the taunts. The game continued, and it was Wednesday's turn. The question came from the same girl who had once dared Eugene to eat his own boogers. "Truth or dare, Adams?" the girl asked, smiling. "Truth," Wednesday replied in a tone completely devoid of interest. The girl's smile widened, clearly pleased with the choice. "Perfect," she said, leaning forward slightly as if sharing a secret. "Then tell us, what's your sex life with Luke like?" Some of the people present stifled nervous laughter, while others watched the scene with anticipation. The psychics who shared classes with Wednesday exchanged knowing glances, reveling inwardly. This stupid girl clearly didn't know Wednesday Adams' character. Wednesday remained motionless, her expression completely unreadable. "I won't answer," she said simply, using her control over the darkness to summon a bottle of rum and a glass to her. Wednesday poured a small amount of rum into the glass and drank it with the same calmness with which she had responded. When she finished, Wednesday broke the silence. "It must be incredibly sad to be you," she said, looking at the girl with a mix of feigned pity and disdain. "So much so that you feel the need to obsess over the private lives of people you barely know. I wonder if it's because your own is so inactive." "Here it comes," the psychics thought, struggling to suppress their smiles. Some in the group let out muffled laughs as the girl stiffened, her face turning red. However, Wednesday wasn't done. "If you're so obsessed with my sex life, maybe you should try having one of your own. Though, of course." Her tone grew even sharper, her barely perceptible smile cruel. "I doubt you have many options, considering that probably no one in their right mind would be interested in someone like you," Wednesday added with a faint, disdainful smile, her eyes slowly sweeping over the girl's face and figure as if she were evaluating a defective object. The girl's lips quivered, and tears began to gather in her eyes. In a desperate attempt to salvage some dignity, she stood abruptly. "You're damn," she stammered, but her words broke into a sob. Without another word, she ran out of the room, followed closely by a couple of friends who tried to console her. Most of the participants remained silent, while the psychics smiled faintly, though none of them laughed out loud. No one close to or friendly with the girl had the courage to come to her defense. Attempting it would undoubtedly be social suicide. Luke, relaxed in his seat, let out a soft chuckle that echoed through the room. Everyone turned their heads toward him. He didn't seem to care. On the contrary, he smirked mockingly at everyone, especially at Mark and his group. "What? Can a guy laugh now?" Luke asked, shrugging with feigned innocence. "Let a game continue," he added when no one dared respond. "These two are ruining the game," Ajax thought, glancing at his friend and his strange, terrifying girlfriend. The game continued, and gradually, the awkward atmosphere began to dissipate. The dares and truths became lighter, with some participants daring to ask funny or challenging questions, though without the same deadly tension as before. Finally, It was Mark's turn. The attention shifted to him, and all eyes turned toward the tall, pale boy. Before one of Mark's friends could ask him truth or dare, Luke spoke up. Truth or dares? Luke asked, speaking for the first time in several minutes. Mark seemed to tense up slightly. He could ask a friend to pose the question, but that would make him look like a coward. Mark thought for a moment. Finally, he decided it was safer to avoid any potentially uncomfortable questions. Dare, he answered, trying to sound confident. Luke smiled inwardly. That was the answer he had been waiting for. I dare you to dodge a punch from me, said Luke, standing up. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Mark frowned. Will you use your auras? He asked.
No.
No auras, Luke replied, and all eyes turned to Mark, awaiting his response. You're a vampire, aren't you? Your reflexes are supposed to be superior, faster, more precise. So prove it. It shouldn't be a problem for someone with your abilities, or is it? Luke added, his tone dripping with mockery. Fine, let's do it, Mark finally agreed, standing up. Both walked to the center of the circle of couches and stopped a short distance apart, locking eyes. The room fell silent, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. On the count of 3, Ajax said, standing up and stepping closer to the two. 1, 2, 3. Luke quickly clenched his right fist and launched it at Mark with impressive speed. Mark, seeing the velocity of the punch, smiled inwardly. The punch was fast, but his reflexes could handle dodging it. He readied himself to evade. What Mark didn't know was that Luke was using his precognition, a new ability he had gained in his battle against Dolores. In simple terms, his advanced observation hockey allowed him to see a short period into the future through precise mental imagery. His plan was simple: make Mark duck, then immediately land an impossible-to-dodge strike right to his face. Luke smiled to himself as he saw the mental image, and just as Mark made the expected move, ducking to the side to avoid the punch, Luke seized the moment. Without missing a beat, he raised his knee to torso height and drove it directly into Mark's face. The impact was brutal. Luke's knee collided with Mark's nose with a sickening crack, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. Mark let out a grunt of pain as his nose broke, and before he could react, blood began gushing out, spraying into the air. The blow left him stumbling backward before he fell face-first to the ground. Mark lay there, dazed and disoriented. Everyone turned to look at Luke, thinking that wasn't part of the challenge. Luke had said Mark needed to dodge a single punch, yet he had thrown both a punch and a knee strike. Still, no one dared to complain. What happened to those vampire reflexes? You can't even dodge a psychic strike without auras, Luke said mockingly. No one could prove he'd used precognition, and considering future sight was an exceedingly rare ability, no one was likely to suspect he had mastered it. Mark remained on the floor, struggling to catch his breath while trying to staunch the blood pouring from his face. One of his friends quickly rushed over, helping him to his feet. Let's get to the bathroom, Mark, the friend said, attempting to stay calm as he guided Mark out of the circle. Mark said nothing, clearly too stunned by the blow and humiliated by the situation. Luke calmly returned to his spot on the couch next to Wednesday, showing no remorse for what had happened. I guess vampires aren't as fast as I thought, he said with a slight, disappointed click of his tongue. Pretty pathetic for a vampire. Maybe he's a half-blood, and his genes are inferior, Wednesday added disdainfully. I didn't know you discriminated against half-blood, Luke said with a faint smile. I don't discriminate.
I just state facts.
It's simply biology. Genetics shows that hybrids often inherit a combination of genes that isn't as optimal as those of a pure-blood lineage. A very low percentage has the chance to get the best traits of both parents, Wednesday replied calmly. Is that what you think? That half-blood are genetically inferior? Asked a feminine voice, surprising everyone in the room. Someone daring to interrupt a conversation between Luke and Wednesday was practically unheard of. Luke, Wednesday, and the others turned toward the voice. Many were startled when they saw who it was. Enid, Luke thought, feeling a slight tension in his stomach. Now everyone understood why someone dared to challenge Wednesday. Seeing Enid's furrowed brow and irritated tone, Luke knew this wasn't going to end well. Enid had always been sensitive about the topic of half-blood. In the past, when they were a couple, she had asked Luke what he thought about half-blood. Knowing that any children they might have would be half-blood, and that Luke needed to rebuild the Poe family, it was a topic that had deeply unsettled Enid during their time together. After all, being a werewolf made her feel she might not be the most suitable partner for Luke's future ambitions. Chapter 175. Wednesday and Enid agree. Is that what you think? That half-bloods are genetically inferior? Enid asked, staring at Wednesday. Yes, Wednesday replied, making eye contact with Enid. She felt emotions swirling inside her, but her face remained expressionless. Enid had been her first female friend. She considered her as such because she had told her about her pet scorpion that died and where she shed her first tears. Enid had even managed to get her to apologize to someone. However, that friendship didn't last long, thanks to love. Did you know that many important members of the 66 families on the council are half-bloods? Enid asked. I know. The trend of marriages between different outcast groups has been increasing since normie culture was introduced into outcast culture. On one hand, it's good for the outcast population to rise and reach heights that it never reached before. However, my point remains the same. Genetically, they are inferior. There's a low chance the child will inherit both genes. So my point stands, Wednesday explained calmly and monotonously. Many were shocked by everything Wednesday had said. Not because of what she said, but because of how much she spoke. Some had barely heard her speak at all. Enid was a little surprised by what Wednesday said. She hadn't expected her to say it was a good thing there were more half-bloods, although she still maintained they were genetically inferior and wouldn't admit otherwise. If the parents' genes are powerful, the child has a better chance of inheriting both lineages. They'll gain two types of powers and be far superior to an outcast person from a single race, Enid argued. That's true, but it's an exception. Usually, they inherit only one type of gene, and that gene is diluted, making it weaker than someone born to two parents of the same race, Wednesday said calmly. She knew her argument was correct, and everyone listening to the discussion agreed with her, no matter how bitter the reality was. And what about love, Wednesday? Do you really choose your partner based on what you feel, or by genetics? Because, come on, Luke isn't just a normal psychic. He has 3 auras. He's perfect genetically, right? Enid asked with genuine doubt. A murmur spread among those watching the discussion. Many exchanged knowing glances, silently sharing a conclusion. Wednesday Adams, the cold, calculating, and almost inaccessible heir to one of the most important psychic families, had chosen Luke not for love, but for his genetic perfection. Everyone who had shared a class with Wednesday saw her as a cold, emotionless person who viewed everyone else as annoying flies. It was strange to think that she truly loved Luke. It was more logical to assume she was with him for his genetic perfection. Hey, can we talk about this later? Luke intervened in the conversation. It was really uncomfortable for them to discuss this in front of gossiping teenagers who found this far more entertaining than the game of truth or dare. Silence. Wednesday and Enid said in unison, not even looking at him. Luke fell silent with a strange expression, but he didn't get involved in the discussion anymore. Everyone was surprised at how easily the two of them had silenced Luke, who had just kneed Mark in the face a few minutes ago, and most people would be scared to speak to him that way. And you tell me Bianca controls me? Xavier said through his telepathic link with Luke. This is different. They were roommates. They must have feelings they've never expressed. Luke justified himself. Just admit it without shame, Xavier thought with a teasing smile. Your assumption is as logical as it is wrong, Enid. My decision to be with Luke is not based on the number of auras he has or the perception of perfection others see in him. And, to be clear, Luke is not perfect. In fact, he's far from it. Wednesday finally responded to Enid's question. Hey, Luke thought, but didn't say anything. The statement surprised both the observers and Enid. But before she could reply, Wednesday continued. For example, he doesn't know how to peel an apple, and it's his favorite fruit. Every day, I have to peel 3 apples, and on top of that, he insists that they be perfectly peeled, with no bits of skin left. Enid couldn't help but let out a light laugh. remembering the days when she was the one in charge of peeling the apples. And let's not talk about his tech obsession. He brought a $5,000 generator to my house. He even made my grandmother start watching cooking tutorials on YouTube, or whatever it's called, Wednesday said, glancing at Luke for a moment. If I didn't, I'd die from food poisoning, Luke justified, shrugging. Have you seen the food your grandmother makes? It looks like it came straight out of a witch's cauldron. Or wait, she actually does cook in a witch's cauldron, he added. The people present couldn't help but laugh at the image. It's true. I once saw the cake she sent to our dorm. It was so black and slimy that I thought it was some unknown creature trapped inside, but it was actually delicious, Enid said with a smile. See, Luke? Enid understands my grandmother's culinary art. It's a family recipe with centuries of history. I wouldn't expect someone like you, with such a refined palate and who lives on processed foods and gourmet meals, to appreciate it, Wednesday said, crossing her arms. Really, Enid? You like that? Luke said, unable to believe Enid actually enjoyed that cake. Yes, it wasn't as horrible as you describe. You have to admit, your palate is a little sensitive, Enid replied, laughing lightly. Traitor? Well, a werewolf's stomach is much more resistant than anyone else's, Luke thought, rolling his eyes with resignation. Yes, sensitive and picky, added Wednesday. True, he focuses too much on the details and little things in food. Like everything has to be perfect or he won't eat it, Enid said, nodding. Exactly. It's the same with pizza. If the crust is overcooked or too soft, it's no longer to his liking, Xavier added with a teasing smile. Enough, let's get back to the truth or dare rounds. Luke exclaimed. What was wrong with having a picky palate? He had eaten horrible orphanage food for 13 years, and now that he had plenty of money, he allowed himself to enjoy fine cuisine. He found it strange that the conversation, which seemed like it would end in a heated argument, ended with Wednesday and Enid agreeing and moving on to point out each other's imperfect traits in some aspects. Enid chuckled softly and let go of the previous discussion about genetics and half-bloods. It was good to realize that Wednesday was with Luke because she truly cared about him, and it had nothing to do with his auras. That put her at ease. Wednesday also stopped talking. She had said enough in front of all these strangers. It was strange that, in the end, she had agreed with Enid, but it was better than making a scene arguing in front of everyone. It was best to stop here and continue with the stupid game from before. The game continued. It was Enid's turn, and everyone paid more attention because of the previous scene and the fact that she was Luke's ex-girlfriend. Yoko was supposed to be the one to ask truth or dare, but a chubby girl with long brown hair beat her to it. Truth or dare? She asked with a slight smile that didn't suggest anything good for Yoko. Enid looked at the girl and recognized her as one of her classmates in the werewolf class. Her name was Julia. She wasn't pleasant at all, and she was always very competitive. Since Enid killed the Hyde and earned the title of the strongest werewolf in her class, Julia had always tried to clash with her. Truth, Enid answered calmly. If she said dare, she would probably be challenged to do something related to Luke and Wednesday, although the truth would most likely be about that too. So, she would have to take a shot of vodka. She wasn't going to share her private life with gossips. Is it true that your relationship with Luke ended because of your family's opposition? Julia asked with a malicious smile. Enid's mother was well known in the world of outcasts for being conservative and strict. It wasn't hard to connect the dots. Everyone on the sofas began murmuring with the friends next to them. It was strange that this game session was focused on one particular person, Luke. So predictable, Enid thought, showing no anger. She simply stood up, walked to the table, poured herself a shot of vodka, and drank it before returning to her seat. Tisich, what a joke, Julia muttered with enough contempt for everyone to hear. The round continued, and it was Julia's turn. Truth or dares? Enid asked, stepping forward to prevent someone else from taking the opportunity to ask her. Everyone felt a strange sense of déjà vu. Dare, Julia answered, looking at Enid with challenging eyes. Enid wasn't known for her fierceness or aggressiveness. It was true that she was said to have defeated a Hyde, but almost no one had seen her fight. Enid smiled sweetly, having gotten the answer she was looking for. All right then. You have to dodge or block one of my punches, Enid said enthusiastically, with a happy expression. The déjà vu returned. It was the same challenge Luke had posed to Mark. Fine, Julia responded without hesitation, standing up and moving to the center. Enid did the same, and they both stared at each other. Julia was taller and broader compared to Enid's small, delicate figure. On the count of 3, Ajax said, acting as the judge again. 1, 2, 3 now. Enid, with surprising speed, transformed her right arm into that of a werewolf. The process was quick, catching Julia by surprise, who hadn't expected her to use her powers. She's just as tricky as Luke Poe, Julia thought nervously, trying to block the punch, but it was already too late. With the speed and strength gained from her partial transformation, Enid didn't give Julia time to react. Her wolf arm hit Julia squarely in the side, making her spit blood and sending her flying backward. The impact was so strong that Julia crashed into a nearby table, falling unconscious to the ground, unable to make a sound. Everyone watched in stunned silence. Even the people who had been dancing on the dance floor stopped and turned to look at the commotion Enid had caused. No one had expected her to be so fierce, even surpassing Luke. Enid's arm returned to its normal form, and with her usual smile and cheerful aura, she sat back down next to Yoko, who was staring at her with her mouth open, as if she had just discovered a new side of her friend. Wednesday gave a slight nod of approval. That wasn't part of the deal, shouted one of Julia's friends in anger, standing up furiously, followed by a guy who was also her friend. Another one of their friends went to check on Julia's condition. We never banned using a partial transformation. She could have used it too, although I doubt her skills are up to it, Enid said with a slight smile and a pleasant tone, as if she wasn't arguing with angry people. Game over. Go check on your friend. Ajax intervened, stepping in between them. If they kept up with this game, more people would end up hurt because of Luke, Wednesday, and Enid. He hadn't expected Enid to share that level of ferocity. But in the end, it wasn't so surprising when he considered that she had been Luke's ex-girlfriend and Wednesday's roommate, both people with such intense natures. Julia's friends, seeing how easily Enid had defeated her, decided to back off. It made no sense to fight someone who had knocked Julia unconscious with a single blow. Plus, there were also Enid's friends, Yoko, Divina, Kent, Xavier, and even Bianca. And something else made them back off quickly. Luke, who was staring at them. No one wanted trouble with him, especially when he didn't seem to be on bad terms with Enid, based on the conversation Enid, Wednesday, and Luke had just had. Chapter 176, Reciprocity. After the intense game of Truth or Dare, the group, now down 2 members, Mark and Julia, scattered throughout the grand hall. Some headed to the dance floor, while others sought quieter corners to chat about nonsense while sipping alcohol. That was weird, thought Luke as he sat in a chair next to Wednesday. The game had been strange, especially since Wednesday and Enid had teamed up to point out some of his quirks. It seemed like it might escalate into a heated argument, but fortunately, everything ended well. Sorry for forcing you to undertake the rigorous task of peeling apples. I won't make you do it anymore, said Luke, crossing his arms. If you want, I'll also erase your grandmother's memory of YouTube, he added. Wednesday rolled her eyes. I don't mind peeling apples for you. If you want, give me a dozen and I'll peel them without complaint. I just wanted to make it clear to Enid and the other gossips that you're not perfect. I don't want you to get a big head just because you have 3 auras, she explained. You're not perfect either. Luke was interrupted by Wednesday before he could continue. I know, I'm not perfect. I'm not criticizing you for being imperfect. Understand this. Imperfection is good. Perfection is boring, like your unpleasant appearance in your female form, she said with a grimace. The only good thing about your female form is your personality, she added. Oh, I see, said Luke, nodding as he grasped Wednesday's point. It wasn't a criticism. In fact, it was a compliment directed at him. You're very mature, he added. He had misunderstood her initial point and felt a bit embarrassed about it. He was also surprised that Wednesday had so easily admitted she wasn't perfect either.
Of course I am.
In this relationship, someone has to be, and I don't see you taking on that role, replied Wednesday, raising an eyebrow, as if the doubt were absurd. I was complimenting you. Luke thought but didn't argue. I'll take you up on the dozen apples offer, said Luke with a half-smile, shifting the topic. Wednesday's expression turned to one of resignation, but quickly recovered.
No.
Do you know how much glucose is in a dozen apples? Eating that many in one day could spike your blood sugar levels and overload your pancreas, she replied, showing her scientific side. Besides, she wasn't about to peel 12 apples a day. We're outcasts. A little glucose isn't going to kill me. Plus, apples are healthy, aren't they? Luke countered. Wednesday narrowed her eyes. Within seconds, she had the perfect response to dismantle his argument. It's true that the bodies of outcasts have superior capabilities, but that doesn't mean they're immune to metabolic diseases or long-term wear and tear. Advanced genetics don't override basic biology, she explained. All right, you win, Dr. Adams. A dozen is too much. How about 6? Luke suggested.
4, said Wednesday.
5, Luke negotiated.
No.
4, or peel them yourself. You can even eat the peel. It's good for you, said Wednesday, refusing to budge. I'm not eating the peel. For apples it is, then, said Luke. At least he'd managed to increase his daily ration from 3 to 4 apples. One more apple to peel, thought Wednesday. While it could be dull to peel 4 apples a day, especially since she had to do it perfectly because Luke was unbearably picky about the details, it didn't bother her as much as she wanted to admit. There was something strangely satisfying about the task. Not because she enjoyed it in itself, but because it was something she did exclusively for Luke. Someone who had always been fiercely independent, who never trusted anyone to do anything for him, and who viewed any favor as a debt to be repaid, was now asking her for things out of sheer whim. That wasn't easy to achieve at the beginning of their relationship. If there's ever something you'd like me to do for you, let me know. It should be reciprocal, Luke commented, and Wednesday frowned slightly. I don't do favors expecting repayment. I do it because I want to, not because I expect something in return. So don't turn this into a transaction, Wednesday said sharply, crossing her arms. That's not what I meant. I don't think you owe me anything, and I don't want you to feel like what you do for me has to be repaid. I just thought that if I enjoy these little things you do for me, maybe there's something you'd want me to do for you. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Like fulfilling one of your whims. Not out of obligation, but because I care, Luke explained. Wednesday's eyes narrowed slightly, but her expression began to soften. I get your point. If I want something, I'll tell you, but you'll do it because you genuinely want to, not because you feel the need to repay me, said Wednesday. Deal, Luke replied with a small smile. At that moment, Eugene approached them, and Luke frowned slightly. He had finally been having an enjoyable conversation with Wednesday, and things were going well. He didn't want to be interrupted by this odd, obsessed kid. Don't be rude or hurtful, Wednesday said to Luke through their telepathic link. Luke had to stop himself from gaping at Wednesday. What the hell? Wednesday telling him not to be rude or hurtful. Was he in some sort of upside-down world? She really does care about her first friend. Well, I guess I can help him out a little, Luke thought, looking at Eugene with a neutral expression. Eugene had been humiliated during the Truth or Dare game. A psychic, outclassed by a bunch of vampires. The other psychics hadn't laughed, but none of them had liked seeing one of their kind humiliated so easily. After the game ended, Eugene had tried to socialize, but he ended up not talking to anyone. With no other options, he returned to his only friend, Wednesday. The awkward part was that she was with her boyfriend, and he felt like he was intruding, but he had nowhere else to go. Sit down, Luke said, surprising Eugene with his sudden kindness. Thanks, Eugene replied quietly, avoiding direct eye contact with either Luke or Wednesday. Why the long face? Are you sad because you're so pathetic that a complete stranger humiliated you? Wednesday asked. What are you doing? Didn't you tell me not to be rude or hurtful? Luke asked Wednesday in confusion. Relax, I know what I'm doing, Wednesday replied calmly, as though her reasoning was obvious. No, you don't, Luke thought to himself. Wednesday treated Eugene in a way that reminded Luke of how she treated Pugsley. She had defended him a couple of times from bullies, but her interactions with him were cold, filled with biting remarks and apparent indifference. It was her twisted way of showing affection, difficult for an outsider to understand. The problem was, Luke had noticed that Pugsley struggled with confidence issues. The same likely applied to Eugene, if not worse, since he wasn't an Adams and didn't have Pugsley's half-mad resilience. "Why did you come to the party? I know you're not friends with Ajax, and you don't hang out with anyone from our grade either," Luke asked, rescuing Eugene from having to answer Wednesday's question.
I
don't know," Eugene answered after a few seconds, clearly caught off guard by the question. Still, he preferred this over Wednesday's inquiry. "Think about it. Was it for friends or girls?" Luke asked with a slight smile, resting his hand on Eugene's shoulder. "Come on, you can trust us. We won't tell anyone," Luke encouraged, trying to get Eugene to open up and share something more personal. Wednesday looked at Luke, puzzled by what he was doing. She had already devised a plan to help Eugene stop being so pathetic and learn to take care of himself once classes resumed at Nevermore, when she wouldn't be around to intervene. "A girl," Eugene finally admitted. "I knew it," Luke thought to himself. "From our psychic class or another group?" Luke asked. He remembered from the show that Eugene had feelings for Enid, which could be problematic. "From our psychic class. It's now," Eugene answered, blushing slightly. Luke remembered now Tamori, the Japanese girl who had transferred in. She was at this party, one of the participants in the Truth or Dare game, and had witnessed Eugene picking his nose. Not exactly a great impression for someone trying to win her over. The only positive was that Nao hadn't laughed like most of the others had. However, her expression had shown a clear mix of disdain and frustration toward Eugene. She was probably upset that, as a psychic, he had allowed himself to be humiliated so easily, tarnishing the reputation of their class. "You're going to regain your dignity tonight, in front of Nao and everyone else," Luke declared confidently, a slight smile on his face. "How?" Eugene asked nervously. "There's going to be a fighting tournament. One-on-one. Direct elimination," Luke said, leaning slightly toward Eugene to emphasize his words. "Wednesday, and I will be the judges. Ajax will be the announcer." Eugene was startled by this revelation, though it didn't seem entirely far-fetched considering there was a dueling area already set up in the Grand Hall. "When did you hear about this tournament?" Wednesday asked, narrowing her eyes. "And more importantly, when did I agree to be a judge?" "When Ajax showed us this place and mentioned the dueling area, he sent me a telepathic message," Luke explained smoothly. "He said he was organizing the tournament and wanted us to be the judges. You know, because of our impressive reputation." Ajax didn't want Luke and Wednesday participating in the tournament and crushing everyone in a landslide victory. It wouldn't be fun and would discourage others from signing up. "And you accepted without consulting me?" Wednesday asked, raising an eyebrow. "I thought you'd like the idea. Doesn't it sound fun? We'll be in a position of power, judging as a group of teenagers tear each other apart in fierce combat. Plus, there's nothing quite like watching a good fight," Luke said with a smile. The idea was indeed appealing to Wednesday. Blood, injuries, and the teenagers who had been happily dancing moments before now competing ferociously. "Fine," she finally agreed. "When Ajax opens the sign UPS, you have to join Eugene. You'll show Nao and everyone else that you're not pathetic," Luke said firmly.
What? Me?
"Sign up? I'll just embarrass myself even more when I'm eliminated in the first round," Eugene protested, shaking his head several times. "I know. That's why I'll help you. With my guidance, you'll win. At least the first rounds are guaranteed," Luke said with a mysterious smile. At that moment, the music from the dance floor softened, and a loud, enthusiastic shout was heard. "Everyone, listen up. The fighting tournament is about to begin. Anyone who wants to participate, come sign up. A great prize awaits the champion," Ajax announced from a stage, holding a microphone. Chapter 177, Vindication. Around the circle where the duels were taking place, there was a large crowd watching two people fight intensely. It was a siren versus a werewolf. The fighting tournament had already begun. The format was simple: 1 versus 1, Elimination direct. 3 rounds, each lasting 3 minutes. If neither fighter was knocked out by the end of the 3 rounds, the judges, Luke and Wednesday, would choose the winner. At 2:10 of the second round, the siren used her song. Magenta-colored sound waves shot out and hit the werewolf, who this time couldn't resist the siren's song. His mind was manipulated, giving the siren the perfect opportunity to land a punch to the werewolf's face.
PUM.
The punch sank into the werewolf's face, breaking his nose and knocking out a few teeth, before sending him flying backward toward the judges' table. The judges were the only ones with a table and seats. With a simple glance, Luke stopped the werewolf from crashing into the table. However, he continued to move him, gently laying him on the table to avoid breaking it. He knew Wednesday would like to see the werewolf's bloodied and injured face up close. 3 teeth lost, broken nose, and dislocated jaw. "Nice," murmured Wednesday, observing the werewolf's face. Luke examined the werewolf just inches away from him and gave a slight nod to Ajax, who was both the referee and the announcer. Rick is knocked out. Lucy advances to the semi-finals with another incredible knockout. All her fights ended in knockouts. Ajax exclaimed enthusiastically, standing in the center of the arena with a microphone in hand. The crowd roared with cheers and applause. Lucy, the siren, looked at the crowd with a wide smile and bowed, giving an elegant curtsy. The applause and cheers grew louder. She was very popular. "TSCH, I don't know what they see in her," Bianca commented with her arms crossed and a slight frown. "I'm sure you'd beat her," Xavier said, trying to calm his girlfriend's bad mood. Bianca didn't sign up for the tournament because she didn't want to be judged by Wednesday. If she entered the tournament, it would be like admitting that her position was inferior to Wednesday's, and she wouldn't allow that. "It's obvious I'd beat her," Bianca said, in a bad mood, and Xavier sighed. Wednesday gave the unconscious werewolf's shoulder a slight push, and his body dropped stiffly to the ground. She had seen enough. She didn't want that ugly face anywhere near her. "Are you enjoying the birthday?" Luke asked with a slight smile, looking at Wednesday. "Yes, it's not bad," Wednesday replied honestly. Thanks to the tournament and the game of truth or dare, the birthday was turning out to be much more entertaining than she initially thought. After answering, Wednesday moved her pale hand and intertwined it with Luke's, which was resting on the table. Luke was slightly surprised but accepted the gesture with a small smile. It wasn't the first time that night that Wednesday showed affection. It was rare, but for Luke it was a good sign. It meant she was in a good mood. Who knows, maybe after living together in the Adams mansion, she no longer cared about showing small signs of affection in public. However, what Luke didn't understand, and what Wednesday had no intention of explaining, was that her gestures were to mark territory. A way of silently saying, "He's mine." She had already seen several girls eyeing Luke, so she had to resort to this tactic. It seems that the kiss at the Raven wasn't enough. Now, the last match of the quarterfinals. Ajax exclaimed, and the cheering died down as everyone watched in anticipation, waiting for the next battle. On one side, we have the giant over 2 meters tall, Skull. Ajax announced, pointing to one side where a very tall boy walked out, towering over 2 meters in height, broad-shouldered and bald. Skull walked confidently, raising his arms with a serious and arrogant expression. A large part of the crowd cheered his name. "Do they really have our age? He must be on steroids or something. How does he go bald at 16? Luke commented. "I guess he shaves himself, or his hair genetics suck," Wednesday remarked. "He reminds me of Atlas, and a bit of your Uncle Fester. Are all bald guys tall, pale, and have slightly manic expressions?" Luke said. "My Uncle Fester has a smaller face and big dark circles under his eyes. Also, his build isn't as massive as those two freaks," Wednesday said with a grimace of disgust, referring to Skull and Atlas. She didn't like the idea of someone so tall and with such a robust build that they looked like a giant. When the applause for Skull subsided, Ajax spoke again. "On the other side, we have the Dark Horse. No one believed he would make it this far. Let's give a big round of applause for the psychic, Eugene Ottinger." Enid watched from the crowd, not participating in the tournament. She didn't want to join if Wednesday and Luke weren't participating. She looked at Eugene with a slight frown. Then her gaze shifted to Luke, and her frown deepened when she saw Wednesday holding his hand. Enid had been watching Luke covertly all night. She realized 3 things. First, that the only one who noticed her staring at Luke was Wednesday. She had to look away several times and act like she wasn't paying attention. Second, Wednesday was showing signs of affection that she had never shown before. Enid knew that Wednesday wasn't someone who displayed affection. Third, Eugene making it to this stage of the tournament had something to do with Luke. She was almost sure of it. She had seen Luke talking to Eugene in secret, as if they were planning something before the tournament began. The crowd clapped and cleared the way for Eugene, who walked to the dueling area, slightly hunched over, looking at the ground. "Look up and stand straight," Luke told Eugene through a telepathic link he had established before the tournament began. Eugene made it to this stage because Luke had been sending him commands to dodge enemy attacks and where to strike. With his clairvoyance, Luke could predict the enemy's moves and quickly sent Eugene a telepathic message to dodge as soon as possible. The malicious intent behind the attacks wasn't directed at Luke, but he was still able to predict the strikes as his telepathic link had gained a new ability. By having a telepathic connection with someone, if anyone had malicious intent toward that person, his observation hockey also activated. That wasn't all Luke had planned to ensure Eugene's victory in his battles. If things got tough, he would send a mental order. Eugene wouldn't resist, and that way his reaction would be quicker to dodge or strike. In a very difficult fight, Luke could use his precognition to see a few seconds into the future and know exactly what move Eugene should make. Although that would be a bit too try-hard. Eugene followed Luke's command, looked ahead, and straightened up. He had never been cheered by anyone before. It was a new feeling. He felt very nervous, and his heart was racing. As he reached the circle, he looked at the giant skull. He swallowed hard when he saw the yellowed teeth and the fierce expression. "Let the fight begin," Ajax shouted, and a bell rang. As the bell rang, Skull charged without hesitation toward Eugene, who took a step back, intimidated by the ferocity of his opponent. Fortunately, at that moment, he received a message from Luke telling him where to move. The seconds of the first round passed, with Eugene mostly dodging at the last moment and barely escaping. Luke felt like he was controlling a character from some video game. It was so much fun. A corrupt judge. What would your friend think if they found out? Wednesday asked, glancing at Luke. Thanks to having a dark horse, his tournament became even more epic. He'd thank me for it, Luke replied with a small smile, while sending another telepathic message to Eugene. Also, this wouldn't be possible if he hadn't improved his training. Your method is good. Eugene wasted no time during his vacation, Luke complimented. Eugene was much thinner compared to the first time Luke saw him, and his movements were smoother and followed a system. This had to be thanks to Wednesday, who always urged him to train and stop being pathetic. Of course. I don't just insult and step on him. My methods are effective, Wednesday said casually. Did you just admit that you insult and step on him? Luke asked, glancing at her for a brief moment. Your method is good too. He's gaining confidence in himself thanks to stepping out of his comfort zone and taking hits. It's good to have fights that are a little more realistic and not just training, Wednesday complimented, ignoring the previous question. Although Eugene was being helped by Luke, who was telling him how to move, it didn't take away from the fact that he had to move himself, face intimidating opponents like Skull, and put into practice what he had learned in training. The first and second rounds ended. Luke and Wednesday, as judges, paid close attention to the fight. At this point, Skull had a slight advantage, as he landed more impactful hits, but Eugene wasn't backing down. To the surprise of many, the 1.60-meter-tall boy was still standing and had managed to land several hits on Skull. At the start of the third round, Skull stopped holding back. His body partially transformed into that of a wolf. At first, he didn't want to use this, thinking it would be pathetic to use it against someone like Eugene, who hadn't even used his blue aura until now. The spectators had only seen Eugene use his blue aura once, in his round of 16 fight, where he used a version of pain induction. That is, mental pain, though much weaker compared to Luke, who can knock someone unconscious just with that ability. Although many thought Eugene was reading his opponent's thoughts to dodge their attacks, otherwise, they would think something was wrong. Skull's speed increased, and now his claws were much sharper and longer. Luke had to change his focus quickly. This was a dangerous situation. Move to the left. Now Luke ordered Eugene, who didn't resist the mental command. It wouldn't work to give him a command and have Eugene execute it on his own. He wouldn't make it in time. Even with the mental command, Skull's claws tore into Eugene's shoulder, causing him to grunt in pain. His clothes ripped, and his shoulder began to bleed. "Listen when I tell you. Send a mental command to Skull telling him to kneel," Luke said, making a quick decision. Eugene didn't understand Luke's request. His mental commands were very weak and wouldn't be effective on a werewolf with greater strength than his, but he would obey. It was either that or lose painfully. He would surrender if possible, but that wasn't allowed in the tournament. You had to finish all 3 rounds, either knock out your opponent or be knocked out.
Now,
Luke said as he saw Skull returning to attack. Eugene sent the kneel command to Skull. However, 2 mental commands reached the bald teenager's mind. Both sounded almost identical, Eugene's voice, or at least that's what Skull thought. Skull's knees buckled, and he knelt. What he didn't know was that one of the voices was Luke's. With his mental abilities, Luke manipulated Skull's senses so that he heard Eugene's voice, even though the strange part was that he heard 2 overlapping mental commands. Attack his brain with your mental powers, Luke ordered as Skull fell to his knees. Eugene raised his uninjured arm and touched Skull's bald head with his hand. Instantly, he released all his mental power to induce pain in the bald man's brain. Skull felt a shock, his whole body trembled, and foam began to pour from his mouth. However, he still didn't collapse completely. "What are you waiting for? Smash his face," Wednesday said impatiently to Eugene through the telepathic link. Eugene was surprised by Wednesday's sudden message, quickly obeying and beginning to knee Skull in the face, which was fortunately within his reach. He had to deliver more than 4 knee strikes before the giant fell to the ground, eyes white, foam at the mouth, and blood dripping from his nose. Eugene was breathing heavily, gasping for air, while barely managing to stay on his feet. His right arm hung limp, he could no longer feel it. He had narrowly dodged and faced Skull for 2 intense rounds, during which his stamina was nearly depleted. If it hadn't been for Luke's warnings, he would have lost within the first few seconds. It would have been impossible for him to fight hand-to-hand against a werewolf of Skull's size. Despite the pain and fatigue, Eugene wore a smile on his face as he saw the crowd cheering him on. For the first time, he didn't feel small or insignificant. Who would have thought? The giant was knocked down. "Eugene is the winner and advances to the semi-finals," exclaimed Ajax, who, like everyone in the crowd, was surprised by this turn of events. He finally used his blue aura to give mental commands, thought Ajax, glancing at Luke, who returned his gaze with a slight smile. Chapter 178. Twisted Hearts. In the semi-finals of the fighting tournament, 2 psychics faced off. One of them, Eugene, and the other, now, much to the surprise of both Luke and Eugene himself. The other 2 finalists were Lucy, a siren, and a vampire named Armand. The few psychics in the audience began mocking the other outcasts, proud that 2 of their own had made it to the semi-finals, despite their smaller ratio compared to other groups at the event. Moreover, only a handful of psychics had entered the tournament. The strongest among them, like Luke, Wednesday, Xavier, and Rose, the girl with the green aura, among others, had chosen not to participate. Having 2 psychics reach the semi-finals was a remarkable achievement considering how few of them competed. For the final to feature contestants from different outcast classes, Eugene had to face his platonic love, now. As Eugene was the last to fight, he had time to rest and watch the first semi-final, Lucy versus Armand. "What am I going to do?" Eugene asked, his tone nervous and tense. The first semi-final had already begun, and in just a few minutes, it would be his turn to fight. There were 2 problems. First, one of his arms was incapacitated. A servant of Ajax had stopped the bleeding, but nothing more. It couldn't be healed, so he would have to fight under those conditions. The second and biggest problem was that he had to fight against his crush, and he didn't want to. Considering that without your arm, your defeat is inevitable, you'd better withdraw and spare yourself the embarrassment in front of the girl you're trying to impress, Wednesday replied, as blunt as ever. Eugene was allowed to forfeit as long as the fight hadn't started, but once it began, there was no turning back. Withdraw? He'll look like a coward in front of the girl he wants to impress, Luke commented. The three of them were sharing a telepathic chat, a new ability Luke had developed some time ago. Its range was shorter compared to an individual telepathic link, but it was effective for group conversations. That's true. I don't want to look like a coward in front of now, but I also don't want to lose in a humiliating way, Eugene said, unsure of what to do. You've already impressed her by making it to the semifinals, or at least that's what we'd like to believe. If you withdraw, you won't seem like a coward since your arm is genuinely incapacitated, argued Wednesday. That's a good point, but I was hoping for something more epic. If you're going to lose, then go out there and give it everything you've got, no fear, as if your arm didn't matter. You will leave your skin in the sand, and even if you lose, now we'll see that you will not give up even in the worst conditions, Luke said, imagining the scene in his mind. Eugene seemed to consider Luke's idea. He would come across as brave, and besides, having made it to the semi-finals was already an achievement. There was no need to keep advancing. He had already proven his worth. If you do that, be ready to get hit with a lot of electric shocks from now, Wednesday said. That's true. Now's going to destroy me, Eugene said hesitantly. Despite being fellow psychics, he had seen that now showed no mercy to anyone. You're a girl. What do you think would impress someone like her? Surrendering or fighting, even though I know I'm going to lose? Eugene asked Wednesday. Wednesday raised an eyebrow, clearly uninterested in Eugene's emotional drama. His love life was of no concern to her. Is he seriously asking Wednesday for romantic advice? Luke thought, giving him a strange look. Given her track record, she hardly seemed like the best person to offer anyone love advice. If you're asking me to figure out what impresses now, my answer is, why would I know that? But based on general human behavior, showing courage and losing with honor might work, Wednesday replied. Eugene nodded slowly. Then I'll fight, he said, mentally preparing himself to suffer in his next match. Impressing a girl and getting her attention seems harder than one might imagine, Luke said to Wednesday through their individual telepathic link. Wednesday raised an eyebrow, as if already anticipating an annoying remark from Luke. How did I manage to capture your attention and, eventually, your beautiful, dark heart? Luke asked, a faintly teasing smile forming on his face. Wednesday regarded him with her usual impassive expression, though her eyes flashed with a barely perceptible spark of emotion. Few people dared to challenge her so openly the way Luke did. Most people, when faced with her sharp demeanor and ability to dismantle anyone with cold, calculated remarks, chose to avoid her or, at worst, walked away humiliated. Luke, however, not only stood his ground but seemed to enjoy sparring with her, throwing equally cutting remarks right back. Do you want a detailed list or a quick answer to boost your ego? Wednesday asked. Surprise me, Luke replied. I really started to take an interest in you when we watched the Hyde kill the normie together. Most people would have at least shown some emotion of shock or disgust while witnessing the murder. You didn't. You stood there, as impassive as I was, watching every detail, without flinching. It was intriguing, Wednesday said. Good to know that my ability to stay unfazed by a murder earned me points with you, Luke said. It was a decent start, Wednesday said dryly, before continuing. Then there's the fact that you already knew about the theory of the Hyde being controlled by Marilyn. At the time, you were manipulating me, and when you confessed it, I admit it caught my attention. A mix of manipulation and a desire to protect me afterward. A fascinating contradiction, she added. Is that why you kissed me after I confessed that? That's unexpected, Luke said with a curious look, and Wednesday nodded. Lastly, our shared interests helped. Dark literature and aversion to people in general, the basics for antisocial individuals, Wednesday said. I wasn't expecting such a long answer, Luke thought. He had only asked to tease her a little, not expecting Wednesday to respond so earnestly. And my strength? Didn't my 3 auras have anything to do with it? Luke asked. His 3 auras and his great strength compared to others his age is a great source of pride for him. Your genetics mean nothing to me, Luke. You could have been born with just 1 aura, and it wouldn't have changed anything, Wednesday replied. The only good thing about your strength is that it lets us fight together without dying in the process. If you were weak, you'd already be a corpse, she added. Wow, always so warm and comforting. Good to know I'm useful for not dying while we fight together, Luke said with a faint smile. Don't play dumb. You wouldn't tolerate someone who couldn't keep up with you either, said Wednesday. I guess you're right. Finding someone you can fight alongside without worrying they'll drag you down doesn't happen every day, Luke admitted sincerely. Exactly, that connection in battle is a good thing, said Wednesday. Which is why being strong is practical, but it's not the most important thing. What interests me about you goes far beyond how strong you are, or how many auras you have, Wednesday added. You know, sometimes I forget that beneath all that coldness, there's a person with a strange and twisted sense of affection, said Luke. You're not exactly the best person to point that out, Wednesday retorted. Well, that's true. Want me to list all the ways you managed to conquer my noble and loyal heart? Luke asked. Wednesday looked at him with a mix of exasperation and hidden amusement. No, thanks. I already have a pretty clear idea. I'm naturally observant, and after spending an entire summer with you, any mystery you might have represented has been solved, she replied. So, I'm an open book to you? What a disappointment. I thought I was more enigmatic, said Luke, sighing with a defeated expression. Enigmatic, yes, but also predictable in certain ways. Though I suppose your ability to be irritating remains surprisingly consistent, Wednesday commented. Was that another compliment? I'm on a roll today, said Luke, returning to his usual irritating demeanor. Wednesday rolled her eyes and turned her attention back to the fight, which was already in its 3rd round. Chapter 179. Harmless Joke. The 3rd round had ended. Both the siren, Lucy, and the vampire, Armand, were in deplorable condition. Their clothes were torn and dirty. Neither had managed to knock the other out. When the bell signaled the end of the 3rd round, everyone turned to Luke and Wednesday at the judges' table, waiting for their verdicts.
Damn.
I didn't pay much attention, Luke thought, putting on a serious expression as if he were deeply contemplating the battle between Lucy and Armand, who were staring at him expectantly. He had been engrossed in his fascinating conversation with Wednesday and had completely forgotten to focus on the fight. Luckily, Wednesday had paid attention. She was meticulous and perfectionist in everything she did. If she agreed to be a judge, she would fulfill the role flawlessly. Through a telepathic message, she informed Luke whom they should declare the winner and the key points behind the decision, though Luke didn't care much about that. His word was law as a judge. He didn't need to justify his decision. The winner is Armand Rocher, Ajax exclaimed after receiving Luke and Wednesday's decision. Armand shouted with joy, and his friends jumped into the dueling area to celebrate with him. Lucy frowned, her expression far from pleased. Objection, the siren shouted irritably. She was not happy with the outcome. It had been a very close fight, and she didn't trust 2 judges her own age, regardless of their reputation. Her words echoed in the air. The celebration from Armand and the cheering crowd came to a halt, and they turned to look at Lucy, who was soon joined by her fellow sirens and a Triton boy who stepped forward to support her. It's true. The fight was very even. From my perspective, Lucy deserved to win, the Triton boy said. We need judges with more experience. It's not the same making decisions with the perspective that experience brings, Lucy said sharply, aiming to cast doubt on the judge's competence. She didn't attend Nevermore, so she only knew Luke and Wednesday by reputation. Before Lucy could add anything else, she saw an object fly past at a speed too fast for her to react. It was a blur that grazed her cheek. A second later, she felt a stinging sensation on her cheek. She brought her hand to the spot and noticed blood dripping lightly. Shut your mouth, siren. More experience? If you'd like, I can cut out your tongue in less than 10 seconds. Would that satisfy your demands? Wednesday said in an icy tone, her hand slightly pointed toward Lucy. She had thrown a small knife of darkness at her, one so quick that Lucy hadn't even been able to react. Lucy, with her hand pressed against her shallow wound, took a step back, intimidated by Wednesday's words and unsure of what to say. "Is that a threat?" "I didn't think a judge would be so irrational," the Triton boy said, stepping forward to protect Lucy. It seemed the two had a close relationship. The entire audience watched Luke and Wednesday and Lucy's group with tense anticipation, swallowing. Those who had played Truth or Dare with Luke and Wednesday couldn't believe how foolish Lucy and her Triton boyfriend were being. They were playing with fire, an extremely dangerous and a very impatient fire. "As judges, we are the law. You cannot object to our decisions," Luke said, extending his arm toward the Triton. The Triton immediately felt an invisible pressure tightening around his neck. His eyes widened in shock, and he began clawing desperately at his throat, futilely trying to break free from the force that was strangling him. A guttural growl escaped his throat as he struggled to breathe, his chest heaving laboriously. As if that wasn't enough, his body began to lift off the ground, his legs kicking in the air in a frantic attempt to regain balance. The sound of his choked gasps blended with the nervous murmurs of the spectators watching the scene unfold. The Triton tried to use his physical strength, which rivaled that of other outcasts his age, but Luke's telekinetic power was far too overwhelming. Luke had already reached 10 tons of telekinetic force. He had achieved level 5 on the telekinesis scale Edgar had once taught him, an impressive milestone for someone his age, rarely seen in history. With his telekinetic strength alone, he could incapacitate an opponent and kill them if they couldn't counter his telekinesis. "Let him go," Lucy cried out in desperation, watching as her boyfriend dangled out of reach, his face turning increasingly purple from lack of oxygen. He hadn't expected telekinesis to be so powerful that it could overwhelm him with a mere extension of Luke's arm. One of the Triton's friends began walking quickly toward Luke, intending to stop him. His logic was that if Luke was focused on choking and immobilizing his friend, he wouldn't be able to deal with him at the same time. Halfway through his walk, the Triton felt something wrap around his right foot. A force yanked him in the opposite direction, and he fell face first to the ground. His face slammed against the cold, hard stone floor. Xavier stood off to the side, holding a whip he had quickly drawn with a pencil he carried everywhere. He knew Luke could defend himself, but he wanted a little action. "Let him go. We understand. We accept the result of the fight," Lucy screamed in greater desperation as her boyfriend's expression worsened and his movements grew weaker. Suddenly, the dry sound of a snap echoed through the air, reverberating in her mind like a fatal blow. Lucy watched in horror as her boyfriend's neck grotesquely twisted to the side. His arms fell limp, and his body stopped struggling, floating lifelessly several meters off the ground. "No, no," Lucy screamed with a heartbreaking cry, bringing her hands to her face as her body shook with pure despair. Her cries rang throughout the dueling area. The onlookers stared at Lucy in confusion. "You bastard! You murdered him!" Lucy screamed, tears in her eyes. She never thought Luke would be so psychotic. It had just been a defiant comment, nothing more. Murmurs began to spread among the spectators. "Murdered? What is she talking about?" a girl whispered, furrowing her brow as she looked at the Triton floating, clearly alive. "Has she gone crazy?" murmured another, noticing how the Triton, although visibly scared and gasping, was still frantically moving his eyes in search of help. "Murdered?" Luke repeated, his tone mocking as he raised an eyebrow. "What a vivid imagination you have." "Looks like the stress is getting the better of you," Wednesday commented coldly. "Look at him. Your partner is still breathing?" Lucy blinked several times, trying to process Wednesday's words. She looked back at the Triton, this time with more attention, and what she saw left her pleasantly surprised, but also confused. Her boyfriend was still alive, even had stopped being choked, and was now just immobilized a few meters off the ground. "What? How?" Lucy murmured, taking a step back as her tears continued to fall.
Luke let out a small laugh.
"An illusion," he explained, dropping the Triton to the ground, where he collapsed to his knees, clutching his neck and gasping heavily. "Just a little joke from me," Luke added with a faint smile. The atmosphere froze. Everyone watching now understood why Lucy had screamed in agony and cried just moments before. A lot of the onlookers exchanged uneasy glances over this little joke. "A joke," a girl whispered, clearly horrified. "That's not a joke. He's messed up in the head," a boy commented quietly, trying not to draw Luke's attention. "He made her believe he killed her boyfriend. Who does something like that?" The murmurs from the crowd mixed with Lucy's sobs as she continued to look at Luke as if she were seeing a monster. "A joke," Xavier thought, looking at his best friend with a strange look. It seemed like spending a whole summer with the Adams had taken its toll. Although the outcasts were known for having a firmer resolve than normies when it came to violent matters, what Luke had just done crossed a line even for them. Making someone believe, so vividly and cruelly, that their boyfriend had died was a joke that went too far. This was due to the fact that this generation of outcasts was not like the previous ones. While they still differed from the normies in their mindset and environment, they were much more exposed to the technology and cultural influences of the normies. As a result, they were more sensitive than previous generations. Still, not everyone was horrified by the joke, just the majority of the people present. "That was a good joke," Wednesday said with a slight tilt of her head. "Though, if you ask me, I would have made the illusion last longer. The trauma would be more interesting and effective in the long run," she added in a completely normal tone. Some of the onlookers turned to look at her, stunned. With this comment, it was already clear that they were a couple of psychopaths. "I will keep it in mind," Luke said. "Don't take note," Xavier sighed lightly, bringing a hand to his face. Ajax quickly made sure Lucy and her friends left the area so the next semi-final could continue. Finally, the semi-final between Eugene and Now began. Many cheered for Eugene for not quitting despite having an injured arm. Even Now seemed a bit surprised, although she said nothing. She wouldn't show mercy, no matter that they were psychic peers. Chapter 180. Labyrinth of Statues. Eugene managed to last only one round before losing consciousness due to a powerful electric shock. However, he gave his all to fight bravely and was applauded for his courage. Even Now, for a moment, looked at him in surprise as he withstood several of her electric shocks, getting up and returning to the fight despite his deplorable condition. "Winner, Now!" Ajax exclaimed, and the crowd erupted in cheers and whistles. Now continued her streak of winning all her matches by knockout. She had improved significantly since the time she was crushed in a practice match against Wednesday during the psychics class. The final began after a few minutes of rest. Luckily for Luke and Wednesday, they didn't have to give another verdict, as Now managed to knock out Armand 2 minutes into the second round, becoming the champion. In the semi-final against Eugene, Now had taken no damage, so her victory against Armand was logical, considering the vampire was injured and exhausted from his fight against Lucy. Before receiving a belt that appeared to be made of real gold, Now whispered something in Ajax's ear. Ajax, holding the belt in one hand and the microphone in the other, looked toward Luke and sent him a message through their telepathic link. "She wants you to give her the belt," said Ajax, surprising Luke a bit with Now's request. "What did she say?" Wednesday asked, knowing something was going on after Now whispered to Ajax, and he looked at Luke. "Now wants me to give her the belt. Who would have thought my popularity would be this high after that prank?" Luke replied with a slight smile, standing up. It seemed he still had the respect of his fellow psychics. They weren't cowards who got offended or horrified by an inoffensive prank. Wednesday stared intently at Now and stood up, following Luke. It seemed her signals to mark her territory weren't working. As Ajax handed the belt to Luke so he could present it to the champion, Wednesday kept her piercing gaze on Now, who, now that she was closer, appeared uncomfortable but said nothing. "Is she a robot? Why doesn't she blink?" Now thought, looking into Wednesday's dark, deep eyes that seemed like an abyss. "The winner is Now Tomoki." "A psychic!" Luke exclaimed, emphasizing the words psychic as he handed the belt to Now, who accepted it with a smile. "Her last name is Tamori," Ajax thought. Luke is supposed to have eidetic memory. He should use it to remember his classmates' names. Since Now didn't seem to care about the mispronunciation, he said nothing. All the psychics present cheered for Now, and the rest of the audience, astonished by her incredible strength, joined in with applause. In the end, "I'm not sure if it's a good thing for Eugene that now won," Luke commented to Wednesday, who nodded in agreement. As the tournament winner, achieving knockouts in all her matches, now wasn't likely to be impressed by Eugene's efforts. "Listen up, everyone. The party doesn't end here," Ajax shouted once the applause died down. Everyone turned their attention back to him. Curious. Does he have something else planned? Luke wondered, noticing it was already 3 in the morning. "The final and most important event starts now," Ajax announced, pointing toward the ceiling. From a hidden slot, a large plasma TV began to lower, stopping a few meters from the ground. Luke looked at the screen and saw what appeared to be a map of a labyrinth. As you may already know, the Petropolis mansion has a large statue garden that has been there for hundreds of years. However, more than a garden, it's actually a massive labyrinth, Ajax explained with a faint, mysterious smile. "Just tell us what the game is," a boy shouted, and more voices joined in, eager to hear the details.
I was getting to that.
At the center of the labyrinth, there's a chest containing $10,000. There are 4 entrances to the labyrinth: south, north, east, and west. The correct path from each entrance leads to the chest, but it won't be easy to navigate the labyrinth's corridors. There will be traps and enemies waiting for you, Ajax explained. When everyone heard that the prize was $10,000, they began murmuring excitedly among their friends. Not everyone was wealthy in the Society of Outcasts, unlike Ajax's family, who owned a mansion worth over $1 million. "I've befriended a millionaire," Luke thought with a strange expression, though he was more surprised by everything Ajax had prepared for his birthday. Calm down, calm down. Now, those who want to participate, go sign up. Rex and Alara will handle the registration. Then all the names will be mixed, and 4 groups will be formed. Each group will enter through a different door, north, south, east, or west, Ajax said, pointing toward some tables where 2 servants were already waiting with paper and pens in hand. "Remember, it won't be an easy quest. There's danger," said Ajax, but by now most of them weren't listening to him and were hurrying to the tables to sign up. "You sure are partying it up big time," commented Luke, watching the wave of people go to sign up. "How much money did you spend on this?" asked Xavier, approaching. "A lot, but it has to be epic, and so far, thanks to the 2 of you, it is," Ajax said with a smile, glancing at Luke and Wednesday, who had been at the center of several memorable moments tonight. "It's been a pleasure. Perhaps I should repeat more of my pranks," Luke replied. "No, 1 is enough," Ajax said immediately. Luke and Wednesday had already traumatized 2 girls tonight. That was plenty. "Should we sign up? You might get to see more statues, maybe even find those expressions of anguish and resignation you were looking for," Luke suggested, looking at Wednesday. It was clear the money didn't matter to Wednesday. As for the danger, she likely didn't expect it to pose any real challenge to her. Wednesday remained silent, considering whether to participate in such an event. Just as she was about to accept, Bianca, who had followed Xavier, spoke up first. "Let's settle the tie," Bianca said in a challenging tone, staring at Wednesday. "Tie?" Wednesday asked.
Yes.
"I beat you in 1 fencing duel, and you beat me in another. Whoever gets to the $10,000 chest first wins," Bianca explained.
Fine.
"If you think you have a better chance of beating me in a race, you're sorely mistaken, but it's sweet that you have that hope," Wednesday agreed immediately. As arrogant as ever, Bianca muttered with a frown as she began walking toward the registration tables. Wednesday followed her. Luke watched Wednesday leave without answering his question. Her competitive streak was clearly off the charts. "Are you signing up?" Ajax asked, looking at Luke. "Yes, although a labyrinth will be easy to navigate with my clairvoyance." "Don't worry, I'll just be sightseeing," Luke said. With his ability, he could see the path through the labyrinth and cross it quickly, but his goal was more about exploration than the prize. "Don't underestimate my family's centuries-old labyrinth. It has defenses to prevent it from being mapped by clairvoyance," Ajax said with a proud smile. Otherwise, the labyrinth, a cultural relic of his family, would be useless against clairvoyant psychics and other mapping methods. "I can fly," Luke said, and Ajax's smile disappeared. Don't do that, please, Ajax pleaded. Relax. I'll just take a stroll and admire the statues, Luke said, patting Ajax on the shoulder. Luke and Xavier joined the line to register. Over 70% of the guests signed up for the Labyrinth tournament. Once all the names were collected, they were divided into 4 groups. Luke was assigned to enter through the north gate. The only person he knew in his group was Eugene and Nao. Yoko was also in the group, but she and Luke were no longer friends after him split with Enid. Wednesday was placed in the group entering through the south gate, along with Enid, Divina, and Kent. Xavier and Bianca ended up in the group entering through the west gate. Once the groups were set, each was guided by a servant. They left the mansion and followed a charming stone path toward the labyrinth, which became visible after a few minutes. Luke was awestruck by the imposing structure of the labyrinth. The hedges forming its walls were incredibly tall, towering over 10 meters, like natural barriers blocking any view of the interior. The entrance to the north side was adorned with a stone arch covered in vines and flanked by 2 statues at the corners, their expressions stoic. As Luke peered past the entrance, he noticed how the light seemed to fade into the winding corridors. When a red flare appears in the sky, you may enter, the servant said respectfully, standing in front of the gate. The group waited for the signal, preparing themselves without knowing what they might encounter in the dark and vast corridors. There's some light in the passages, right? Asked a brown-haired boy. It was nighttime, and the only light came from the moon, occasionally obscured by a few lonely clouds. The lighting is dim, with torches placed at intervals, the servant replied.
Bang.
An echo rang through the night air. A red spark pierced the darkness with a sharp whistle, climbing higher and higher into the night sky. Everyone in the group started running toward the entrance, which was wide enough for several people to run side by side without bumping into each other. Here we go, Luke thought, walking at a moderate pace.